Chapter 413. Hearing Yang Fan's words, Princess Taiping's mouth turned into an O shape, like a cute little girl who was startled. She looked at the man on the stage who did not look like a man, and then looked at Yang Fan who had a serious look on his face and asked, "Are you joking?" Yang Fan did not speak, but his expression had explained everything. Princess Taiping looked at the woman on the stage again and said in disbelief, "How can a man look like this? What an evildoer!" Yang Fan said with a faint smile, "It is nothing. It is said that there are many men like this in the Goose Hall. Their skin is better than pink, and their cheeks are like peach. Their wrists move, and their clothes are light as the wind blows." Taiping made a nauseous expression and said softly, "Disgusting!" She rolled her eyes at Yang Fan again and said angrily, "You are not allowed to go to that kind of place. If I find out, I will break your legs first." After saying this, her face turned a little red. Yang Fan shrugged his shoulders. "I have not been to that kind of place, but the popularity of men has been since ancient times. If it is too early, the records will be lost. But since the spring and autumn and warring states period, it is not uncommon in the history books. In the Han Dynasty, it was especially popular. Emperor Gaozu Lu Bang, Emperor Wen Lu Hung, Emperor Wu Lu Xiao, almost half of the 25 emperors of the Han Dynasty kept male pets. As for the current dynasty, the atmosphere is even more flourishing. Men raise their bodies to sell their goods and calmly welcome and send them off. Incense brothers, heroes on the dry road, they are everywhere in the streets. Hee, the youth is like a young history, and the beauty is like the rosy dawn, holding one's trousers and blushing, turning one's hair slanted. Princess Taiping gently frowned her beautiful eyebrows and said with disdain, "Stop talking. The more I hear, the more disgusting it is. Yin and yang in the universe, male and female, there are differences. Men with eyebrows are beautiful and coquettish, and they wear strange clothes and accessories, and their attitude is similar to that of a woman. What is this? Not to mention that men are female to entertain men. But it is disgusting enough that a man looks like a woman." Yang Fan glanced at her and said, "It seems that your highness is wearing a man's clothes even though you're a woman." Princess Taiping took a deep breath and looked at him provocatively. "Look at me. Which part of me looks like a man?" When she took a deep breath, the 2 round lumps on her chest became even more prominent. Her waist was slender, and her buttocks were prominent. Although she was wearing a man's robe, her womanly side was exposed, especially her face. Under the light of the lantern, it appeared strangely charming, a pair of petal-like red lips slightly parted. As long as one wasn't blind, who would be able to treat her as a man? Yang Fan didn't dare to look again, but he didn't reply. He just turned his head away. Princess Taiping smiled complacently. She took another look at the stage and said, "However, these 3 people are definitely not like the Catamites in the Guqin's house." Yang Fan said, "How can I dare to make such an assertion? You know them?" "I don't know," Taiping said. "I don't. However, even if the famous Catamite prostitutes are rich and have this kind of extravagance, they won't have this kind of bearing." Princess Taiping squinted her charming phoenix eyes lightly, looking at their clothes and makeup carefully. They can't be considered to be extremely rich, but each and every one of their movements, even the manservants serving behind them, had a certain air about them. This is the bearing of the aristocratic families, which can't be learned by the nouveau riche. It's even more impossible for men and women who are used for sex. Yang Fan couldn't see these things, but he believed in Princess Taiping's judgment. Yang Fan shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter if they are Catamites or born women. It has nothing to do with us. Let's go to the front." By this time, the duck and goose's feet had been scalded to a crisp. They were lying on the iron board, still breathing. Their bodies were twitching from the heat of the iron board. Bursts of fragrant meat wafted in the air, but the duck and goose still let out miserable cries from time to time. Princess Taiping couldn't bear to watch. Yang Fan's words were exactly what she wanted. The two of them were about to leave when suddenly they saw two servants wearing black clothes and small hats leading a young donkey to the bottom of the stage. They raised their heads and said something to the stage. Because it was noisy on the street, Yang Fan didn't deliberately listen, so even he didn't hear clearly what they said. He only heard the beautiful man on the stage, who looked the most like a woman, said, "Kill it, cook it while it's hot. It'll go well with the wine." Immediately after, two servants brought the donkey to the side. Immediately, several burly men pounced on it and nailed 4 wooden stakes to the donkey's forelegs. Then they took out ropes and firmly tied the donkey's 4 limbs. Yang Fan and Princess Taiping were about to leave, but seeing this scene, they didn't know what they were going to do, so they couldn't help but stop. They saw the servants tied the donkey very quickly. Obviously, it wasn't the first time they had done this kind of thing. Then he saw a big man with a naked upper body, holding a cow ear knife in his hand. He came to the side of the donkey, raised the knife, and with a pew sound, blood burst out, and a wound was opened under the donkey's abdomen. The onlookers let out a hong sound and retreated in fright. Princess Taiping couldn't help but let out a scream and covered her mouth with her hand. She was scared stiff. Yang Fan looked at her and couldn't help but take her little hand and pull her back a few steps. That soft little hand felt as cool as jade when he held it in his palm. Princess Taiping had never seen an animal being slaughtered, so she was shocked by this scene. Her heart was beating wildly. As soon as her hand was held by Yang Fan, she knew he wanted to protect her. She couldn't help but feel a sweetness in her heart. She quietly glanced at him and saw that her Lang Jun was staring at the donkey in front of them. She was a little unwilling, so she couldn't help but lightly pricked his palm with her fingernail. They saw the saber-wielding servant plunge his big bare hand into the donkey's belly through the gurgling blood. He stooped down as if groping for something. Suddenly, he gave a loud shout, and the onlookers cried out in alarm, and a section of the donkey's intestines was pulled out of the donkey's belly. Ugh! Princess Taiping couldn't bear it anymore. She felt waves of nausea. She quickly turned around and hid herself behind Yang Fan's shoulder. She hurriedly said, "Let's go, let's not look at this kind of thing anymore." Yang Fan complied and walked out with her. Princess Taiping didn't dare to look back. She only firmly held on to the corner of his clothes. She looked very pitiful. Yang Fan was very curious. He didn't know what those people were going to do, so he retreated very slowly, still staring inside. He saw that the servant who used the knife cut a piece of the donkey's intestines amidst the donkey's miserable cries and threw it into a big basin nearby. Immediately, someone started to clean it. Someone in the crowd excitedly said, "Hey, did you see it? I heard that people eat it this way because it's fresh." When the donkey's intestines are cleaned and cooked, the donkey is still screaming and not dead. Tasting it, the donkey's intestines are especially delicious. Yang Fan gently shook his head and thought, "What's the difference between killing the donkey and cooking it with the donkey's intestines and cooking it with a live donkey's intestines? These people's way of thinking is really strange. In the end, it's just sensationalism." The two of them walked for quite a distance before Princess Taiping realized that she was still holding on to the corner of his clothes like a little girl. She couldn't help but shyly let go. Immediately, she remembered the feeling when he was holding her hand. It vaguely reminded her of the time when Yen Shangyuan was holding his hand and running on the long street. She felt a sweetness in her heart, and her frightened heart calmed down a little. Yang Fan didn't have the same thoughts as her. He only shook his head and sighed. As long as there's a festival, this Ding-Ding Street is always lively to see. Princess Taiping snorted. "What kind of lively is that? First, it's a man who doesn't look like a man. That's fine. But he prefers this kind of cruel cooking. It's even more disgusting." Yang Fan smiled and didn't comment. Right at this moment, a group of girls came over from afar, chattering noisily. They were all talking at once. They were very excited. "Did you pick it up?" "Hee hee, of course." I picked up 2 needles, one 7-hole needle and the other golden needle. Aya, you're so lucky. I searched the ground for half a day and didn't pick up a single one. What bad luck. Hee hee, I told you to come out with a lantern. But you insisted that we all carried lanterns and there's no need to carry lanterns. Are you lazy? I carried the lantern and shone it on the ground. When I saw the shiny silver needles, I naturally picked them up. Ai. The girl became even more dejected. These needles were sprinkled by the saints. They've touched the saints' hands. If I had known earlier, I would have brought out the brightest lantern no matter what. Hearing this, Princess Taiping smiled slightly and revealed a disappointed look in her eyes. It turned out that the Qixi festival was also celebrated in the palace. Every Qixi festival, the weaving and dyeing department would offer a sacrifice. The Minister of Commerce would give out 7-hole needles, golden needles, and other things to the imperial concubines and palace maids. The Emperor and Empress would also build a beautiful platform on the side gate and display fruits, wine, and dishes on it to ask for favors from the Altair and the weaving maids. Sometimes they would throw 7-hole needles and golden needles at the foot of the city and allow the common people to approach and pick them up on the ground. Looking down from the tall building, one could see countless people walking around with lanterns. It was a funny scene. When Princess Taiping was young, she accompanied her father and mother to play on the Qixi festival. She used to throw 7-hole needles and golden needles on the platform as a game. Thinking about it now, it was like a dream. The girl who didn't pick up the chichao needles saw the girl who picked up the 2 sewing needles and said, "They might not all be left behind by the saints. Maybe there's the crown prince, the imperial concubines, and the palace maids." The girl who picked up the needles snorted. "You don't understand? Palace maids are not qualified to throw needles to the common people. Imperial concubines or the crown prince can, but the current crown prince is about to be deposed. He is imprisoned in the East Palace all day and cannot step out. How can he still celebrate the Qixi festival with the saints?" Hearing this, Princess Taiping's eyes darkened. The news that the crown prince was about to be deposed was known even by the common people. The girl said, "Even the crown prince is not qualified to come. How can there be imperial concubines in the harem?" Princess Taiping's legs seemed to be filled with lead, and she walked slowly. Yang Fan walked a few steps and suddenly realized that Princess Taiping did not follow him. He turned his head and saw that she was troubled. He thought of what the girl said and knew what Princess Taiping was worried about. He wanted to turn around and comfort her. The words were on the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed them back. The descendants of the Wu family were not qualified to be the crown prince. All along, Yang Fan's plan was to help Li Tang regain the throne. On this point, he and Princess Taiping were like-minded. But in the current situation, the crown prince was indeed in danger. The changes in the future were unpredictable. Yang Fan wanted to comfort her, but he did not know where to start. Princess Taiping walked slower and slower. With her eyesight, how could she not know that the crown prince was in danger? It was just that today she finally let go of her worries. But she was reminded by the words of the girl. Now that mother is the emperor, Li Tang may not have no hope of reviving. But once the crown prince position falls into the hands of the Wu family, then it will be over. But once mother has made a decision, who can influence her? The people mother trusts the most are never her relatives. The more relatives they are, the more she fears them. Princess Taiping was very worried. She did not know why, but the image of the young man who was more beautiful than a girl on the stage suddenly flashed through her mind. Princess Taiping's eyes moved. She suddenly stopped and waved to a female sumo wrestler. She whispered in her ear, "You go and find out the names of the 3 young men who just pulled out the intestines of a live donkey and where they live." Chapter 414. The streets were bustling with noise and excitement, but one must be with interesting people in order to enjoy the excitement. Yang Fan and Princess Taiping were strolling on the streets, but they did not know how to be romantic. The city was filled with lanterns, and the streets were as bright as day. However, to Yang Fan, that feeling was far from the dreamy and illusionary feeling he had last night. Princess Taiping's mood was even lower than Yang Fan's. The unintentional words of those girls swept away the joy in her heart. Thinking of her brother, the Li family, and her own unpredictable fate, she was depressed. "Let's go to the Tianjin Bridge. It's so noisy here," the two of them spoke at the same time. Although their words were not exactly the same, their meaning was the same. Therefore, they turned around and walked toward the Tianjin Bridge. They could see the Tianjin Bridge in the distance. The lights at the bridgehead made the graceful bridge look like a crescent moon on the horizon. At this moment, a woman and a young boy hurriedly rushed over and walked opposite to Yang Fan and Taiping. Because of their hurried footsteps, they almost bumped into each other. The streets were crowded with people. Since Princess Taiping wanted to enjoy the life of the common people, the 8 strong women could not drive away anyone who could get close to the princess. This was the foot of the Son of Heaven. Under normal circumstances, no one would come out and hurt people without saying anything. Although the woman's footsteps were hurried, she was a woman, and the child she was leading was also an underage child. Therefore, the 8 maids did not appear to chase her away. By this time, they almost bumped into the princess. 2 maids wanted to step forward to protect her. Yang Fan saw the matron was in a hurry to avoid Taiping and almost fell down. Hastily, he reached out to support her. Seeing her clothes and hairstyle, he noticed she was a married woman. He slowly said, "Auntie, be careful." "Thank you, Langjun." The woman thanked him. She pulled the young boy and was about to leave when 3 people hurriedly chased after her. The one in the middle pointed a fan at her and shouted, "Wife, don't go!" He caught up with her in a few steps and stretched out his hand to stop the woman. He laughed and said, "Dear, I'm not a man-eating insect. Hee hee, I just want to treat you to a cup of wine. Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" The woman was angry and anxious. She said, "I am a woman. I don't know you. Why would I drink wine with you? How rude! Get out of the way." The man, surnamed Pan, winked and said, "It's fine if you don't recognize him at first. Won't you recognize him after a drink?" Yang Fan and Princess Taiping looked at each other. They did not expect that they would encounter such a vulgar plot of molesting a civilian girl when they were about to reach the bridgehead. However, the more vulgar it was, the more common it was. In the boundless world, spring and white snow were definitely not the theme of life. That's why Confucius said, "I have never seen anyone who is as virtuous as lustful." Fortunately, they were at the side of the bridgehead, and the light was not bright enough. Princess Taiping, dressed in men's clothing, was standing next to Yang Fan. The man hurriedly glanced at her and did not see her beauty clearly. Otherwise, he was afraid that Princess Taiping would have provoked him. Seeing this situation, Yang Fan and Princess Taiping could not help but look at the woman seriously. The woman was tall and slender. Her skin was fair, her buttocks were small, her waist was slender, and her neck was slender. She looked like she was full of life. Looking at her age, she should be about 25 or 26 years old. She looked dignified and intelligent, with a different kind of beauty. Whether it was her eyes that were as bright as spring water or her skin that was as smooth as jade, her whole body emitted a kind of pure aura. Therefore, her dignified temperament and beauty were especially moving. Next to her stood a young man of about 13 or 14 years old. He looked strong and stocky, probably her younger brother. As for the youth surnamed Pan, he was about 24 or 25 years old. His appearance was not ugly, and his brows were delicate and pretty. However, his gaze and expression, along with a faint smile that was not a smile, gave off a sense of wretchedness. At the foot of the Son of Heaven, the universe is bright. Please conduct yourself with dignity. The beautiful woman said with a frown. She pulled the young man and wanted to leave. The young man, surnamed Pan, laughed mischievously. He waved his hand, and the two people who followed behind her grabbed her from the left and right. Seeing this scene, Yang Fan and Princess Taiping were not in a hurry to leave. Yang Fan had seen young masters of rich and powerful families or ruffians take liberties with beautiful women. But Princess Taiping had never had the opportunity to see such a scene. Therefore, she stopped and only watched from the side. Both sides exchanged a few words. Yang Fan and Princess Taiping stood to the side and understood the general situation. It turned out that this woman was not the young man's elder sister, but his mother. The young man was already 13 or 14 years old. It seemed that this beautiful woman should be a few years older than her young appearance. This mother and son also came out to play on the Chinese Valentine's Day. They did not expect to meet this refined scum, surnamed Pan. This surnamed Pan was called Pan Jinny. Today, he also came out to play with his two servants. At first, he chose to go to the crowded places. He squeezed and rubbed against the crowd. He rubbed against the woman's plump buttocks and touched the girl's breasts. He rubbed against them until his heart bloomed with joy. He was playing happily when he met this beautiful woman who was shopping with her son. It must be said that this Pan Jinny had good taste. It was probably because he had seen a lot of flirtatious and charming women. Seeing this woman's dignified and refined appearance, he was like a diner who had eaten a lot of fish and meat and suddenly saw a plate of juicy side dishes. He immediately drooled with greed. In fact, he was also very careful. He deliberately followed this young woman around for half a day. He saw that she was only accompanied by her son. There was not even a maid or maid by her side. He knew that she came from a small family. His courage grew, and he thought of a crooked idea. He chased and teased along the way. Pan Jinny's temper was aroused, and he could not let it go. Princess Taiping was somewhat curious at first. When she heard the story, clearly, she immediately revealed a disgusted look. She said to Yang Fan in a light tone of anger, "Why are you still looking here? Quickly send this disgusting thing away." Yang Fan cast a glance at her and thought, "You are a dignified princess. You also have the 8 great Vajra guardians by your side. You only need to give an order, and you will immediately make him disappear. Why do you have to order me around?" He did not know that in Princess Taiping's heart, she did not have the slightest thought of ordering Yang Fan around. Instead, when a woman encounters a problem, she would subconsciously seek support from her man. As for whether she had the ability to stop this kind of behavior, she ignored it. Yang Fan also wanted to stop it. After hearing Princess Taiping's words, he took a step forward and shouted, "Stop!" Pan Jinny pushed the woman to the corner. Her son, who was angrily cursing, was also pushed to the side by a servant. He was about to reach out to hook the woman's round and lovely chin when he suddenly heard Yang Fan's loud shout. He turned his head and gave him a look. His face sank and he coldly said, "Your Excellency, this path is very spacious. Walk on your own path and don't meddle in other people's business." Yang Fan smiled and said, "To me, this is not other people's business. Since I have seen it, if I don't do something, I will be neglecting my duty." After saying that, he took a step forward and put his hand on Pan Jinny's shoulder. He exerted a little force. Pan Jinny cried out in pain and quickly let go. Yang Fan was still holding his shoulder without moving. He said to the woman, "Auntie, take your son and leave." The woman was shocked and scared. She quickly thanked Yang Fan and looked at her son in fear. Her son was currently being twisted by one of Pan Jinny's servants. Princess Taiping waved her fan. A female sumo wrestler dressed as a man's hand flashed past and reached out to pat the servant's shoulder. The servant turned his head to look, only to see a fist as big as a bowl flying towards his face. With a punk sound, his face looked as if a dye house had opened up, with multicolored hair draped over it. The man's head was covered, and he fell to the ground. When he got up, he felt a great pain. He wanted to open his mouth to curse, but he suddenly found that his teeth were exposed. He reached out to touch them and only felt blood on his hand. It turned out that a few of his teeth were also knocked out. That woman was only a woman from an ordinary small family, and could not bear to see such a scene. As soon as she saw her son had escaped, she quickly took his hand and hurriedly thanked Yang Fan and Princess Taiping as they hurriedly left. Pan Jinyi saw that they were even more overbearing than him. He couldn't help but fly into a rage and said, "How dare you? You are just a few street dogs. How dare you injure this young master's servant? This young master will send you to the Luoyang prefecture to eat the plank." Princess Taiping impatiently said to Yang Fan, "Are you going to have a court hearing here? Hurry up and send them away." Yang Fan laughed. The hand that was holding Pan Jinyi's shoulder slid down to the back of his neck. Pan Jinyi couldn't even speak. He choked and coughed. Another family member saw this and was afraid that his Lang Jun would suffer. He quickly called out, "Stop! My Lang Jun is the youngest son of the Minister of Examinations in the Ministry of Appointments. How dare you be so rude?" Yang Fan made a sound of surprise and said, "So you are from an official's family. This kind of behavior is really a disgrace to your family. This official will teach him a lesson on behalf of his father." After saying that, he lifted his leg and kicked Pan Jinyi's, but with a bang. Yang Fan did not hold back his strength in this kick. Pan Jinyi cried out in pain. Yang Fan used Pan Jinyi's, but like a ball. He seemed to be performing the technique of bouncing the ball. His leg kicked 17 or 18 times in an instant. Finally, he let go of Pan Jinyi's shoulder and kicked him hard. Pan Jinyi fell to the ground like a dog eating **T. Yang Fan heavily snorted and patted his waist. He said, "This official is from the Ministry of Justice. Do you think I can do anything about this? If I see you using your power to bully men and women again, I will teach you a lesson. When I bring you to the yamen to be punished, I am afraid that your father will not look good either. Get out." Seeing this person's skills and hearing that he was an official from the Ministry of Justice, the two servants knew that they had hit an iron plate. They didn't dare to say anything more. They just went forward to pick up Pan Jinyi and ran away. Yang Fan clapped his hands and walked back. Princess Taiping smiled and said, "How powerful!" Yang Fan shook his head and said, "He is just a gentle scum. He uses his family to bully good people. There is no power to speak of." Princess Taiping smiled and pointed forward with her small fan. She said, "There, the boat is parked there. Let's go." The two servants of the Pan residence were afraid that their young master would be at a disadvantage, so they carried Pan Jinyi and ran far away before putting him down. The moment Pan Jinyi's feet touched the ground, he fiercely slapped the uninjured servant's face and scolded, "Useless idiot!" He angrily dusted his robe that was stained with mud and said, "In the future, don't tell me your name. Do you want to ruin my father's reputation?" The servant obediently agreed. Pan Jinyi turned around and looked at the back of Yang Fan, who was walking to the pier. He gritted his teeth and said, "The Ministry of Justice? Humph! When I find out who you are, I will definitely teach you a lesson." The servant, who was punched in the face by the servant from the princess's mansion, held his crooked nose and said with a sad face, "Lang Jun, let's go back to the mansion." "I am not going back." Pan Jinyi's face was full of anger. He said, "I suffered such a big loss for no reason. Is this the end of it? Bah! If I don't sleep with that woman, I won't be able to vent my anger. Go after her, you must find her." Chapter 415. Ever since Wu Zetian sealed the Luo River as a divine river and forbade fishing in the Luo River, the river had become much more deserted. It was currently night and there were no boats passing by, so there were only a few pleasure boats on the river. These pleasure boats belonged to the wealthy and noble families. Ordinary families did not have the leisure to do so. Even if they did, they would not be able to withstand the repeated inspections of the officials to see if they had brought any fishing nets or fishing gear. The boat that Princess Taiping had prepared was not very large. It was not one of those luxurious pleasure boats or pleasure boats. It looked very ordinary on the outside, and it only had one floor. The middle was the cabin, and the bow and stern were the decks. At most, it could hold 20 to 30 people. Footboards had already been set up between the boat and the shore. The officials inspecting along the river already knew who the owner of the boat was, so they did not dare to obstruct them. Princess Taiping and Yang Fan boarded the boat. They untied the ropes and raised the sails. The boat slowly sailed to the center of the boat and then followed the Luo River downstream. On both sides of the shore, there was still an endless clamor of music and dancing. However, there was still some distance between them, and the boat was much quieter. On the front deck, there were only two people, Yang Fan and Taiping. The 8 maids had already retreated into the cabins. The 2 shores were lit by lanterns, and above them was the Milky Way. The water sparkled and gradually became hazy. Although it was already autumn and the gentle autumn wind blew, it did not cause one to feel cold. At some point, Princess Taiping had already taken off her head. Although she was still dressed as a man, her long hair fluttered about her shoulders. Under the starlight, there was an abnormally gentle and beautiful feeling. Princess Taiping lightly sighed. Looking at the scenery slowly gliding by on both shores, she sweetly said, "Only here do I feel a bit more relaxed." Yang Fan turned his head and stared at her, asking, "Isn't it good to be on the street?" Princess Taiping shook her head and softly said, "Loneliness. There are too many people there, so I am very lonely." These words seemed very difficult to understand, but Yang Fan understood. Yang Fan was silent for a while. His gaze met the slowly approaching pleasure boat and said, "Perhaps for you, loneliness is already an unbearable pain. But is it really so hard for a proud daughter of heaven? If that was the case, how could he be envied by the world? Most of the time, it's not that ordinary women don't have the same feelings as you. It's just that they don't have the time to feel sorry for this kind of feeling, because they have suffered much more than you, and they have experienced much more bitter things than this." Princess Taiping frowned slightly. Not only did she not get comfort from Yang Fan, but she was also implicitly stabbed by him. Didn't this guy have any tender feelings for the fairer sex? Princess Taiping frowned slightly and then relaxed. Because of this, he is Yang Fan, the one and only. There were many people around her who were willing to flatter her. As long as she was willing, there would be countless men who would carefully serve her every day. Wasn't the reason why she was infatuated with Yang Fan because he was different from others? Perhaps the first time his heroic figure had entered the heart of this beautiful princess was on that day, on the banks of the Luo River, when he had flatly refused her. Princess Taiping's star-like bright eyes stared at him and softly said, "No matter what, today you are willing to accompany me. I am very happy, really." Yang Fan similarly stared at her and seriously said, "But I am not happy at all. I am not willing to be forced, manipulated by others, even if she is a beautiful princess, even if there are countless men who would wish for such an invitation. What I said is also true." He lightly exhaled a mouthful of impure air, and then inhaled a mouthful of autumn wind. Between this exhalation and inhalation, he asked in a low voice, "You said, Wan Er's oath is not unbreakable. Can you tell me now?" Princess Taiping's face slightly showed a trace of anger, and then she helplessly smiled bitterly. "When facing me, can't you have a little bit of patience?" Yang Fan did not speak, and Princess Taiping's tone had a slightly pleading tone. "I have not been this happy for a long time. The last time was that night. Tonight, let's not talk about business and also not talk about other men or women, okay?" After a moment of silence, she added, "Tomorrow morning, I will tell you everything you want to know." Yang Fan's hands held onto the side of the boat. The pleasure boat in front of them was passing by, and the waves caused their boat to rise and fall. As the bow of the boat rose and fell, Yang Fan smiled at Princess Taiping and said, "Okay, tonight is Chinese Valentine's Day. Do you have wine to drink?" There was wine on the boat. There were all kinds of wine, and all the famous wines of the Tang dynasty were here. Of course, most of them were wine. They were using a set of sparkling and translucent wine glasses. The glasses shone brightly under the light. When the dark red wine was poured into the glasses, the red color of the wine reflected on their faces. The two of them tacitly stopped bringing up all the problems that troubled them. This night, they only gave it to joy. They talked a lot. Princess Taiping told Yang Fan how she felt when she first saw the bow-hitting youth, and how he was surprised when he first refused her invitation. Yang Fan talked about how he trained the monks at the White Horse Temple and how he wanted to defeat the women of the inner court. Of course, he also talked about how he first appeared on the banks of the Luo River. He talked about how they used tricks to deal with Lu Junfan, making Lu Junfan write the Book of Separation on her own initiative. In the end, they went for wool and came home shorn. This made Princess Taiping very happy. The wine and dishes were very sumptuous. Although they were all fish, they were cooked in a variety of ways. There were also many kinds of fish. They were all fresh fish caught from the Luo River and cooked on the spot. As early as 3 or 4 years ago, Wu Zetian decreed that the Luo River was closed to fishing. However, this ban was only effective on the common people in the marketplace. If the princess wanted to eat the fish of the Luo River, it would be as easy as turning over her hand. Because they had entered the cabin, Princess Taiping's 8 great Vajrapani hid outside. Naturally, neither the boatman nor the cook could listen to their conversation, so there were only the 2 of them in the cabin. Although there were only 2 people, they did not feel that the boat was empty. Loneliness did not depend on the number of people or the number of people, especially when a man and a woman were together. The wine cups were not big. Every cup of wine was just enough for people to taste its mellow fragrance. Therefore, the wine was poured frequently. The more the wine was poured, the faster one would get drunk. When Yang Fan felt that his face was already swollen to the point of numbness, Princess Taiping's eyes also stared blankly. Where is this boat going? Yang Fan's mind was still clear. He listened to the sound of the oars outside the cabin with some uneasiness. It doesn't matter where it goes. It's best if it goes to the horizon. That way, I won't have so many worries. Princess Taiping giggled. Seeing Yang Fan's worried expression, she covered her mouth and said, "Look at your courage. Don't worry. When the boat reaches the junction of the river, it will turn back. When it's daybreak, it will definitely come back." After Princess Taiping finished speaking, her body tilted and she snuggled into Yang Fan's arms. Originally, they were sitting opposite each other, separated by a few tables. Unknowingly, the 2 of them had already sat together. When the warm and fragrant jade entered his arms, Yang Fan was slightly surprised. Princess Taiping's soft and beautiful face had a touch of drunkenness. She hugged Yang Fan's waist and said coquettishly, "I want you to hug me to sleep." "Coax me to sleep," Yang Fan smiled bitterly. It was not the first time that he had pushed away the princess's hug, but this drunken princess, precisely because she was unconscious, how could she do this? Yang Fan's hand had already reached her shoulder. In the end, he did not use force. He just gently slid down. One hand supported her soft and plump waist. The other hand slid down along her smooth back and stopped at the bump. As soon as Princess Taiping fell into his arms, she immediately fell asleep. Neat eyelashes covered her eyes. On her rosy cheeks, a pair of petal-like lips were slightly pouting. She looked like a tender and naive child. Yang Fan leaned back and found a comfortable position. Taiping, who was originally lying in his arms, was now lying sideways on his lap. She used his thighs as a pillow, still sleeping sweetly. Yang Fan let out a long sigh. He leaned his head against the bulkhead. With the slight undulation of the ship, his body gently swayed. His body was drunk, but his heart was not. His mind was still clear. At this time, Taiping was undoubtedly cute, but tonight it was only tonight. not to mention that she had a husband, not to mention the resistance from Wu Zetian. Her own personality made it impossible for her to be a good match for Yongfan. She was like a ball of fire. Her love was blazing, but because she was carried away, she would burn herself and others. The only reason she could tolerate it now was because Yongfan wasn't hers. What if they had a closer relationship? Yongfan had never doubted her love for him, but no matter how careful Taiping was, he could feel the arrogance and strength hidden deep in her bones. She was her, Princess Taiping. This was her charm. But because of this, Yongfan had never thought of letting her become a little woman by his side. That was impossible. The royal family would not allow it. The empress would not allow it. Even Princess Taiping herself would not allow it. The obedience and gentleness in the boudoir would never become her everything. Once she left that bed, she would still be her, Princess Taiping. Yongfan was not an ignorant teenager with a face full of pimples. He was not an ignorant teenager who was stimulated by hormones. He thought that he could have everything if he had love. He thought that he could solve everything. He thought that he could overcome his personality and all objective existences. Love was not everything. Love could not replace everything. Love could not conquer everything. He gently pulled a soft and smooth quilt and wrapped it around Taiping. Just like that, he hugged her and slowly closed his eyes. In the sky, there was a Milky Way. On the ground, there was a Luo River. On this night, the cowherd and the weaving girl met on the Magpie Bridge. The cowherd and the weaving girl met once a year. If this year was a year on Earth, then they would actually meet every day. The ordinary people were just a group of fools who were fooled. What if this year was a year in heaven? Then in the human world, it would be 360 years. Ordinary people were not immortals. They could not live for 360 years. Therefore, this meeting was already a lifetime. Yongfan and Taiping, were they in heaven or on earth? In the Milky Way, the magpies were building a magpie bridge. In the Luo River, the bow of the boat was plowing the water. In the sky, in the water, on the shore, on the boat, in the eyes, in the heart, they weaved together and danced in heaven and on earth. It was a mess. Chapter 4:16. It was dawn. At dawn, the boat was anchored by the Tianjin Bridge, rising and falling with the waves, just like Princess Taiping's plump chest. Princess Taiping woke up leisurely. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw Yongfan quietly staring at her. His eyes were clear. He was sitting, and it seemed that he had been sitting all night. Princess Taiping was surprised when she saw the situation on the boat. She hurriedly got up and said apologetically, "You didn't sleep all night?" Yongfan smiled and said, "It's okay to not sleep occasionally." He paused and said, "Listen, many people on the bridge and on the street didn't sleep all night. They are going home now." Princess Taiping said embarrassedly, "But you have to go back to the yamen to work today." Yongfan smiled again. "It doesn't matter. In fact, I am more free than anyone else in the yamen. I can sleep at any time. No one will bother me." Princess Taiping couldn't help but laugh and said, "I vaguely know about your situation in the Ministry of Justice. I know that you sleep every day, but I also know that you are not a person who likes to admit defeat. Although your counterattack may not necessarily be a victory, if you don't fight back, then it is too abnormal. I think many people are probably waiting to see what you can do." Yongfan frowned slightly and asked doubtfully, "Many people? For example?" Princess Taiping said sweetly, "For example, the Mother Empress, me, King Liang, and Shui Yuanzong." Yongfan gently stroked his chin and said leisurely, "So many people? I didn't expect that." Princess Taiping gently moved her messy hair away from her temples. She rested her head on Yongfan's lap. Her cheeks were pressed by the folds of her clothes, which made her look like a lazy and charming mature woman. She used her long and slender fingers to tuck her hair behind her ears gracefully. She said slowly, "The Queen Mother sent you to the Ministry of Justice. so it's impossible for her not to be concerned about your actions there. Wu Sanxi's greatest opponent is Wu Qingxi. If you can control the Ministry of Justice, then you'll be a great help to him, so it's impossible for him to not be concerned. As for Cui Yuanzong, his abilities may be limited, but to be able to sit in such a position, other than Fu Yu that kind of trash, there's definitely no idiot. And we have the same goal. Of course. I also hope that you can establish yourself in the Ministry of Justice. Princess Taiping stared at him and said word by word, therefore, many people are waiting and watching. If you can't get a foothold in the Ministry of Justice, then neither the Queen Mother nor Wu Qingxi will hesitate to give you up. After all, they want you to be of help to them, or to make them worry less. They don't want to treat you like a child who hasn't grown up and run to you every day to support you and worry about you. As for Cui Yuanzong, he has only been in the Ministry of Justice for a short time. He has reached a delicate balance with Chen Dong for the time being. After all, he is the head of the Ministry of Justice. This advantage can ensure that he can suppress Chen Dong. Therefore, he also doesn't want a person with a strong background to jump out and raise a tiger. Yang Fan smiled and said, "It sounds so complicated. This is why I don't like the officialdom. There are too many insidious people here. In comparison, being in the army is better. And those influential officials, although they are all arrogant and domineering, they show their emotions on their faces. They are not like those people in the Ministry of Justice, all of whom are like smiling tigers." Princess Taiping sighed and said, "The officialdom is like a battlefield, but it's even more complicated than a battlefield." Yang Fan interrupted her sigh and began to talk about love. "It's already dawn. Let's not beat around the bush. I went to the appointment last night because you forced Wan to make a poisonous oath. How can this oath be broken? If you don't tell me earlier, it will always be like a thorn in my heart." Princess Taiping's expression darkened, and she asked gently, Have she told you about the oath?" "Yes. Did she tell you what I said?" "Do you need to say it? You and I are allies." "Of course. Allies can also be abandoned. So, if I say that you came to save me because you and I have a common goal and we are allies, I will be speaking against my conscience. However, I appreciate your kindness, but it doesn't mean that I can let you bully my woman. I am very angry about this. I am really angry." "Your woman?" Princess Taiping listened and felt a little sad. If the person Yang Fan was talking about was her, how good it would be. Unfortunately, she had to play the role of the one who bullied his woman. Princess Taiping lowered her eyes and said softly, "I said to her, if I can't get it, you can't get it either. I can save her, but you have to make a poisonous oath. If you break the oath, then he will." Princess Taiping was silent for a moment. She raised her eyes and asked, "Do you understand?" Yang Fan frowned and said blankly, "What do I understand?" Princess Taiping's face was a little red, and she said, "I said if I can't get it, you can't get it either. This is the premise of her poisonous oath. So it's not unsolvable." Yang Fan thought for a moment and suddenly understood. He was shocked and his expression was complicated. Then the expression on his face became more and more interesting. Princess Taiping lowered her eyes and didn't dare to look at him. She secretly glanced at his expression, and her face became redder and redder like a hen laying eggs for the first time. In fact, this bold princess sometimes liked to be shy. Yang Fan's expression kept changing. After a while, he suddenly said in a low voice, "But when you made Xiao Man swear, you didn't say that." Princess Taiping glanced at him faintly and said faintly, "Because I didn't know that you loved her so much. I only thought that it was enough if she didn't pester you. Isn't it good to have one less person to share with me? But you can like Xiao Man after Wan Er. Why can't you like me? How can I be with you? Why not?" Princess Taiping raised her head and her eyes were shining. "Now everyone thinks that I am with you. What about it? As for the future, it is not impossible for me to divorce the Emperor's son-in-law. If the Emperor's son-in-law divorces me, I can also do it." "Impossible. As long as your mother is alive, it is absolutely impossible. You are the only daughter of the Empress. It doesn't matter who your husband is. The important thing is that his surname is Wu. When she is alive, I can be with you without any status. My mother is getting on in years. One day, she will leave me. So what? At that time, you can have a status? Princess Taiping was silent for a while and became angry. Now I can be with you without any status. In the future, can't they give up their status? Seeing that Yang Fan's eyes became sharp, Princess Taiping quickly gave in and explained, "It is not that I want to be aggressive, but because of my identity. Even if my elder brother is the emperor, he will not allow his sister to share a husband with another woman, unless I am the emperor." After saying this, Princess Taiping suddenly became stunned. Her eyes suddenly brightened, and no one knew what she was thinking. Yang Fan said, "If you are the emperor, I will not be your empress. There is already an empress in the world. Perhaps she has the ability to be an emperor better than many men. But because of the opposition of the people, her wisdom and energy were used to eradicate the dissidents. As a result, if it were not for the strong foundation laid by the 2 generations of the Taizong and Gaozong, she killed so many members of the royal family, good ministers and famous generals, and the world would have long been rotten." These words were simply rebellious, but the 2 people in the cabin had the idea of, after the Empress, they will restore Li Tang's empire. Naturally, they would not care about these words. Yang Fan said in a deep voice, "Therefore, one empress is enough. No one can stand another one. Unless there is a day when the women in this world can be on equal footing with the men, you'd better give up on this idea." Princess Taiping said, "Let's not talk about the world. Let's talk about you and me first." Yang Fan said, "Speaking of you and me, I am naturally grateful to be able to win the heart of your highness. But your highness's plan is always unbearable. You always feel that you have suffered a lot and made a lot of concessions, but you never seem to think about other people's feelings. Xiao Man is my first wife, and Wan and I have been in love for a long time. I will be with them for a long time, and in the future we will have children. Then, one day, you tell me to divorce them and kick out the children they gave birth to for me. But your magnanimity is you can allow them to secretly contact me without a name. You still feel that you have made a great sacrifice and suffered a great grievance." Princess Taiping was somewhat at a loss and said, "What did I say or do wrong? What is wrong?" Yang Fan held his forehead and said in distress, "Your Highness, you've been high and mighty since you were born, noble beyond words. Your identity is naturally different from ours. As a child of the royal family, your thinking will never be on the same level as ours. I don't know how to communicate with you." Princess Taiping frowned tightly and looked innocent. Even though she was extremely smart, she still couldn't understand what Yang Fan was talking about. She was a descendant of the emperor, and indeed had an essential difference from ordinary people. Her identity, her environment, made it impossible for her thinking to stand on the same level as ordinary people. Yang Fan's previous worries were not wrong. Some things were deeply rooted in the bone marrow along with a person's living environment and status. When it was formed, it was difficult to change because of other things, even if it was love. The longer they were together, the more estrangement and divergence there would be. The prince and the princess lived a happy life from then on. That was a fairy tale. They might be together sweetly, or they might be more and more bored. They might be intimate, or they might have an affair. They might have a cute little prince or princess, or they might be resentful towards each other because they couldn't have a child. They might be 4 generations living under the same roof, or they might have a conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. They might still be happy, or they might be sleeping in the same bed. As for Princess, marrying a poor boy who lived at the bottom of society since childhood, and still being able to be very harmonious with him. That was a fairy tale among fairy tales. Chapter 417. Seeing her confused face, Yang Fan gave an example. "What's the difference between this behavior and what your mother did to Wu Yuji? Perhaps you didn't use that cup of poisonous wine? You have a noble status and a beautiful appearance. Therefore, even in my heart, I have never felt that there was anything hateful about your actions. I even felt flattered until I personally saw one wash her face with tears. Your Highness, you have a noble status and unparalleled beauty, so I should be flattered that you favor me? What if you and I were reversed? If I were you and you were me, I was the descendant of the emperor, the imperial prince, I had status and identity. I liked you, who already had a partner, and I wanted you to give up the person you loved to be with me. I felt that I had suffered a great injustice when I was with you, and I didn't care about my status with you. I promised to marry you one day and give you a status. You should be grateful, right? What's the difference between this and those foppish men who rob women by force? If the man surnamed Pan that we saw last night didn't just want to play with that beautiful woman, but really liked her, should she be grateful and abandon her husband and son? Princess Taiping said slowly that that's different. Yang Fan raised his eyebrows and said, "What's the difference?" If that woman had a husband, because a noble young master of status, well-dressed, good-looking, and who had feelings for her seduced her, she would abandon her husband and son and be willing to be his mistress. The result would be that she would be scolded by the people of the world for being fickle and shameless. On the other hand, if this person was a man and was favored by a noble woman with status and identity, and he refused to abandon his wife and son to have an affair with her, wouldn't that make him a cold-hearted man who doesn't know what's good for him? Princess Taiping was at a loss. She felt that what Yang Fan said seemed to make sense, but also seemed to be strange and unreasonable. For thousands of years, it had been a world where men were superior to women. Even though she was a high and mighty princess, it was impossible for her to be completely unaffected by this concept. Therefore, she never felt that there was anything wrong with what she did. Therefore, she had a lot of resentment towards Yang Fan. But now, after listening to Yang Fan's words, she felt that it was indeed reasonable. Princess Taiping said blankly, "Then what should I do?" "I hope you can untie this knot in Wan Er's heart. No matter what the result is, I don't want you to use coercion to make me submit to you. That kind of Yang Fan is not the man you want." Yang Fan said, "No matter what happens between us, I don't want you to use coercion to make me submit to you." But Princess Taiping was so confused that she did not notice. She only stammered, But how can I untie the knot in her heart?" "That oath," Yang Fan said. "I've never believed that the gods in the underworld would care about what vows everyone has made. An oath is like a devil in the heart." Princess Taiping was silent. Yang Fan looked at her expression and did not say anything else. She was an intelligent woman. It did not take much effort to talk to intelligent people. If she could understand, these words were enough. If she could not understand, then it would be useless to say more. Dong, 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 dong. The bell and drum on the gate of heaven sounded, startling countless jackdaws that flew all over the sky. The gate of heaven was close at hand, so the sound of the bell and drum was especially loud. Even the river under the Tianjin Bridge seemed to be rippling, as well as stirring up ripples in their hearts. Yang Fan listened to the sound of the bell and drum and said to Princess Taiping, "I have to go to the Ministry of Justice in a while. With regards to the situation in the Ministry of Justice, I already have some plans. Duguan Zhongzhong Sun Yuxuan and Simon Zhongzhong Yen Xiaojun are two fence-sitters. I plan to start with them first. If I want to knock these two down, I need to borrow their power. I need to borrow your power." Princess Taiping raised her eyes and glanced at him. There was a beautiful expression in her eyes. "Why not King Liang or Xue Huai?" Yang Fan said, "That's because you're the weakest among the three forces. I can't reveal all my trump cards to others at once. Sun Yuxuan and Yen Xiaojun are not worthy of my trump cards." Princess Taiping gritted her teeth and said hatefully, "You just said that I am a playboy who bullies men and tyrannizes women, and now you want my help. Does this count as going back on your words?" Yang Fan sternly said, "You have to be clear, my princess. Right now, we're talking about official business. This is a matter between allies. If you help you you will be helping yourself. If I gain a foothold in the Ministry of Justice, it will be of great help to your plan. It is better to separate public and private matters." Princess Taiping hesitated for a moment and said, "Mother Empress is watching how you are going to open up the situation. If I step in, will she think that you are a hopeless fool?" Yang Fan smiled. "Our emperor is a person who wants to achieve nothing and does not care about trifles. If I call for reinforcements for every matter, I will be an incompetent person. But if I just want to open up the situation and do not use my ready-made connections because I am afraid that people will talk behind my back, then I will be foolish. A foolish person will not be able to achieve anything. Chun Dong has the geographical advantage. He has been working hard in the Ministry of Justice for many years. Cui Yuanzong has the timing. As the head of the Ministry of Justice, he can naturally recruit a large number of confidants. This is their strength. I have the strength of harmony. Why should I not use it? Should I tie my hands and feet and give up my advantage because I am afraid of being ridiculed? I have what you don't have. That is my ability. You have to admit it." Yang Fan said it very calmly and naturally. It seemed that after being locked up in the censorate court, he had really thought through a lot of things. He felt as if he had been reborn. Princess Taiping looked at him, and there was a faint feeling of fascination in her eyes. Now he was a little overbearing and a little unreasonable, but she just liked his taste. It was probably because there were too many men who surrounded her from childhood to adulthood, so she could only see this man in her eyes, and in her heart she was only willing to let him live in her. Yang Fan was about to leave when he suddenly stopped and said to Princess Taiping, "I don't want to make Juana sad anymore. You tied the knot, so you untie it." After thinking about it, Yang Fan was still worried. He looked at her again and said, "If you are not willing to do it, I will do it myself. I am not helpless. Wanner swore in my name. To tell you the truth, Yang Fan is only the name I am using now. My surname and name are not Yang Fan. I am not from Jiaoji. My childhood actually grew up in a small place called Tao Yuan Village in Shaozhou." Princess Taiping's face changed. Yang Fan was very satisfied with her reaction. If Wan was a man, she would be a very upright gentleman. Regarding things like vows, some people could be as casual as eating and farting. But Wan was different. She would value vows and keep them, especially this oath that concerned her life and death. Even if there was a chance that it could be fulfilled, she would rather be wrong than offend it. Although Yang Fan did not believe this, he could not make one and not believe it either. Therefore, he could only let Princess Taiping untie this knot herself. He believed that as long as Taiping was willing to do it, there must be a way. Yang Fan opened the cabin curtain and walked out. When the 8 strong women, the bosun, the helmsman, and even the cook saw him come out, they quickly looked at the sky and the water, pretending that they did not see him at all. The princess and this man had spent the night together in the cabin. This was a very embarrassing thing for them, so they could only pretend that they did not see him. The pedals had not been put down, but the ship was not very high. Yang Fan only needed to jump and lightly landed on the soft sand. Then he brushed off his robe and walked towards the Tianjin Bridge. He did not notice that when he said the words Tao Yuan Village in Shaozhou, Princess Taiping's eyes flashed with horror and fear. The Peach Blossom Village was a small place, and the high and mighty princess should never have heard of it. Because he and the princess were conspiring against each other, he was not worried that if the princess was curious, she would inquire about the Peach Blossom Village. But it was obvious that Princess Taiping already knew about this place, and Yang Fan thought that this trump card had shaken Princess Taiping's mind. The trump card should always be thrown out cleanly to look cool. Therefore, after throwing out these words, he casually flicked his sleeves and left, not noticing the horror and fear in Princess Taiping's eyes. Yang Fan arrived at the Ministry of Justice. After midnight, he went back to his room to sleep. Chun Dong's assistant, Luo Ling, found an excuse to sneak in to see Yang Fan sleeping soundly. Luo Ling held back his laughter and went back to tell Qindong what he saw. Qindong shook his head and sighed, feeling a little disappointed that Yang Fan did not fight for power. Since Yang Fan was so sensible, although Qindong still hated him for taking away the position of the left minister, he also knew that it was not up to him to come and go. As long as Yang Fan did not fight for power with him, then he would be the de facto leader of the Ministry of Justice. And with a puppet like Yang Fan in the middle, he could avoid direct conflict with the aggressive assistant, Minister Cui. Therefore, at lunch that day, Qindong's attitude towards Yang Fan was a lot more polite. After lunch, as usual, it was time for the petty officials and public servants to chat. When the bell rang again in the afternoon, everyone returned to their own quarters to do their work. Yang Fan burped and said to Feng Shihui, who was about to leave, "Tomorrow is a 10-day holiday. Help me make an appointment with Dr. Sun and Dr. Yen. I want to treat them at the Golden Hairpin Drunk." Yang Fan smiled and said to him, "You should come too. We haven't had a gathering yet." When Yang Fan said this, he suddenly remembered that on the first day he reported to the Ministry of Justice. Dr. Qindong seemed to have said that he would hold a banquet to welcome him. Now it seemed that this banquet could not wait for the time being. If he wanted to let old Qin treat him, he would probably have to wait until he had a showdown with old Qin or even old Cui. Feng Shihui looked at his thoughtful expression and suddenly felt that something was wrong. Although he was not optimistic about Yang Fan, since he had decided to rely on Yang Fan, he originally had the idea of keeping a rare commodity. If that was the case as a subordinate, should he first treat his superior to a meal? It was too empty to just flatter. Thinking of this, Feng Shihui said to Yang Fan, "Yang Langzhong, how can I make you spend money? Even if someone wants to treat, it should be this lowly official who treats you first. How about, after the yamen is dismissed, let's have a small gathering first?" When Yang Fan heard this, he repeatedly waved his hands and said, No, tonight, absolutely not. Tonight, I have a very important matter to attend to." Feng Shihui looked at his serious expression and unconsciously became nervous. "What is it, doctor?" Yang Fan said, "Last night on the Double Seven Festival, I was outside and did not return for the whole night." Feng Shihui suddenly understood. "Oh," Yang Fan said, "although we had already informed you in advance, but women, you know." Feng Shihui nodded his head and said with a sympathetic face, I understand. Doctor, take care." Chapter 418. My Wife, I'm Back. When Yang Fan got home and walked to the third courtyard, he deliberately stopped for a moment. He first adjusted his expression to the calmest and most unperturbed state, and then he cheerfully entered the reception hall. "Lang Jun, please wait a moment. These days are accounting days. Yesterday was Chinese Valentine's Day, and there were the most customers. I was afraid that it would affect the business, so I delayed it for another day. Tonight, I brought the accounts of the 2 shops back to check. I still have to send them back tomorrow morning. It'll be done soon." Xiao Man didn't even raise her head. Her slender, jade-like fingers tapped on the abacus beads. When Yang Fan saw that Nuno didn't greet him as happily as usual and was now busy with accounting, his heart slightly shivered. He quickly lightened his footsteps, gently approached, and carefully sat down next to her. Xiao Man held a pen in one hand and was still very nimble when she tapped on the abacus beads. Her other hand was flipping through the account book. Yang Fan sat to the side. His wife's face was as white as a duck's egg. She had beautiful long and neat eyelashes, beautiful eyes that were like lacquer, a small nose, and cherry lips. Xiao Man's expression was very focused, so Yang Fan was very nervous. Pa! A crisp sound, like a big whip being used to the best of the best. The big whip exploded in the air, and Xiao Man hooked her pinky finger. The abacus beads hit the bamboo crossbar and made a very loud sound. Yang Fan immediately shivered, and his body suddenly straightened. Xiao Man said happily, "All right, I've finally snatched these 2 accounts." Yang Fan quickly flattered, "You've worked hard, my wife. My wife's accounting skills have also improved. It's only been a while, and the accounts of the 2 shops have been finished." Xiao Man rolled her eyes at him and said, "How are they 2 shops? This is just 1 shop's account. We'll talk about the other shop's account after dinner." Yang Fan hurriedly said, "That's amazing speed. Only my wife has this kind of ability. Otherwise, our family's business would not be so prosperous. Last night I had a dream. I dreamed that my wife was the reincarnation of the boy of wealth." As Yang Fan spoke, he suddenly realized that after hanging out with manager Feng Shihui for a few days, his ability to flatter had actually improved. Indeed, he who kept company with ink would be stained black. Xiao Man giggled and snorted. "You're unaccountably solicitous. Did you do something wrong?" "Not at all, not at all. I've already told you about what I told you the other night." Yang Fan nodded and bowed. He quickly took out something from his pocket and said to Buchi here, "Wife, look, what is this?" "Ah, so beautiful." Xiao Man's eyes lit up. Yang Fan said contentedly, "That's right. I snuck out of the yamen early this afternoon and wandered around the market for a long time before choosing this one that I like the most. Isn't it beautiful? Only my wife deserves such a jade ornament." What Yang Fan took out was a jade hairpin. It was crystal clear, simple and unadorned, but not lacking in elegance. It was a jade hairpin that was as slender as a crescent moon, with a spring jasmine at the top. It was carved from a single piece of jade. At the bottom, there were 3 slender jade ornaments that looked like willow leaves. They were all beautiful, greenish-white jade with extremely fine lines on them. There were fine holes at the top of the petals, which hung from the jade hooks above. This jade hairpin itself was an extremely high-quality jade. To carve holes on this beautiful jade and carve different layers of patterns, branches, and lines, it required especially superb jade carving skills. Among the 3 shops that Xiao Man ran before she got married, the most important one was a bead shop, so she naturally knew what it was. "Beautiful, right? Come, let me put it on for my wife." Yang Fan hurried forward and took off the gold and ivory hairpin from Xiao Man's head. He then gently inserted the jade hairpin into her jet-black hair. The jade leaves swayed gently, and it really added a bit of spirituality to Xiao Man's temperament. Yang Fan immediately clapped his hands in admiration. Xiao Man gently stroked the hairpin in her hair and said with a faint smile, "Lang Jun, are you eating now?" Yang Fan shook his head and said, "I just got home. Let's rest for a while. There's no hurry to eat." Xiao Man said, "All right, then let's sit in the courtyard for a while. I just did the accounts, and I'm a little dizzy." Yang Fan was a little pretentious just now, but this time he was really concerned. He said nervously, "My wife is also a person who practices martial arts. Her body has always been strong. Why do you feel a little dizzy? Are you sick?" Xiao Man pushed away his hand that was touching her forehead and rolled her eyes at him. "I didn't sleep last night. I've been in the shop the whole time and only came back this evening. Why don't you feel dizzy?" Yang Fan was surprised. "My wife did the accounts last night." Speaking of accounts, Yang Fan's heart skipped a beat. Xiao Man said angrily, "How can I do the accounts last night? I was helping out in the shop. There were a lot of people. Yesterday's business was equivalent to 6 days of income on a normal day." "I see." Yang Fan heaved a sigh of relief and accompanied Xiao Man to the courtyard. There was also a tall cassia tree in his courtyard. Under the tree, there were 2 rosewood bamboo beauties. Their entire bodies were lustrous and natural. In the summer, the 2 often enjoyed the cool air on the couch, so their bodies were incomparably clean. Money is something that can never be earned enough. Our family's money can't be used up for 3 lifetimes, so we don't have to work too hard. Yang Fan waited for her to sit on one of the bamboo beauties. Then he also lay down on the other couch. He put his head on his hands and sighed. "I also didn't sleep last night, but fortunately, I made up for it in the yamen during the day." Xiao Man's handsome eyes slid over. "Oh, Lang Jun also didn't sleep last night?" Yang Fan took the opportunity to say, "Yes." We wandered around Ding Ding Street for half a day and almost walked from the side door to the Ding Ding Gate. Yesterday the Emperor threw 7 whole needles and golden needles down from the side gate. I wanted to pick one for my wife and bring it back to beg for mercy. Too bad I didn't hit the head cage. That needle fell to the ground. Where am I going to find it? Then I crossed the Tianjin Bridge and walked all the way. Yang Fan was like a chatterbox talking nonstop. Not only did he talk about the donkey's intestines being pulled out and the duck being fried, he also talked about how he saved a girl when he saw injustice on the road. He also carefully recalled the various games he saw yesterday, adding details and embellishments, in order to fill up the empty space of the night with this public scene. Unfortunately, he really didn't spend much time on the long street last night, so halfway through, he suddenly stopped. Xiao Man blinked and said, "Continue, where did you go?" Yang Fan was stunned. He met Xiao Man's gaze and suddenly lost the courage to talk nonsense. He stammered, "Later, we took a boat to the Luo River." Xiao Man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Just the 2 of you?" Yang Fan immediately said, "There was also the boatman, the helmsman, the cook, and 8 female sumo wrestlers." Xiao Man rolled her eyes at him. "They were also in the cabin with you too?" Yang Fan didn't say anything. After a moment of silence, he swore, "I can guarantee that although there was only 1 man and 1 woman in the cabin last night, we absolutely didn't do anything." Xiao Man's pearly white teeth gently bit her thin, red lower lip. She said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "Lang Jun, oh, tell me, if I was alone with a man in the dead of night, and then I said nothing happened, would you believe me?" Yang Fan's face twisted like a steamed bun. "I believe you." Xiao Man's eyes widened. "You really believe me?" Yang Fan nodded vigorously. "I really believe you. Then why do you have such a bitter face?" Believe me, but I'm also not willing." Pfft. Xiao Man couldn't help but laugh. She quickly straightened her face and snorted coldly. "You also know you're not willing, so she's willing?" Yang Fan said in a low voice, "Didn't I tell you in advance that some things are better explained to her? Tell me, in this kind of situation, what else can I do with her?" It seemed that conventional methods would not be able to make his wife calm down. Yang Fan's eyes turned and secretly swept a glance. He did not see Senjer and Tao Mei, those 2 maids in front of him. He leaned toward Xiao Man and quietly said, "Your husband can prove my innocence." Xiao Man asked curiously, "How can you prove it?" Yang Fan leaned half of his body out and whispered in her ear for a while. Xiao Man's pretty face suddenly blushed. She stared at him with a mix of anger and amusement. She said angrily, "Hey, don't give me that. You didn't even feel tired after a night of torment. What can this method prove?" Yang Fan saw that the method of handing over the grain to prove his innocence was not used. He couldn't help but innocently say, "Then what do I have to say to make you believe me?" Xiao Man smiled slightly and said, "All right, I won't make things difficult for you. From the beginning, I believed you. If I don't even believe you, who else can I believe?" Yang Fan's heart warmed as if a big stone had been dropped. He couldn't help but take her little hand and put it in his palm. He didn't speak, but let the body temperature gradually fuse together. His heart was infinitely warm. Under the osmanthus tree, in the shadows of the lanterns, a young couple whispered, "My wife clearly believes me. Why did you deliberately play tricks on me? Just now I really thought you were unhappy. You don't know how anxious I was." "Then who is to blame? You obviously didn't do anything, but you made it look like you have a guilty conscience. It's infuriating to see." In that case, it was me who overreached myself." That's not it. Although Lang Jun had no choice last night, I also believe in Lang Jun's character. But even if I believe everything, I still feel a little uncomfortable in my heart. Tell me, if I don't vent my anger on you, who should I vent it on? Ahem, my wife's words make sense. Also, Lang Jun should be more careful in the future. Huh? What did I do? In the future, if you want to buy something to make me happy, it doesn't matter if it's expensive or cheap. But don't buy it from our own shop. I can tell at a glance that it's from our family. Oh, I'll remember. However, you're doing this to keep the goodies in the family. I'm still very happy. In the future, as long as it's in our own house, don't take it outside. Yes, we have a beautiful and charming wife at home. So we definitely won't think about other women. I didn't say that. Your husband figured it out myself. Hee, you can infer other things from one instance. You're worth teaching. As long as Nunu finds such a smart clerk in the shop, she will promote him to be the vice shopkeeper. In that case, I'll help you calculate the accounts tonight. Don't. The more you help, the worse it will be. My account is actually easy to calculate, but the messy account in your yamen. The young couple joked for a while and finally became serious. Bucci sat up and asked with concern, "What should we do?" Yang Fan's expression also became serious. He didn't get up, but just gently patted Bucci's round and strong thigh. He slightly narrowed his eyes and looked at the starlight shining through the treetops. His eyes seemed to be suffused with cold starlight. Don't worry, I should also calculate the accounts. Chapter 419. The next day was a 10-day holiday. Before noon, Yang Fan invited Imperial Officer Sun Yuxuan and Minister Officer Yan Xiaojun to a banquet at the Golden Hairpin Drunken Banquet. Coincidentally, there was another group of officials at the banquet. When they saw Yang Fan at the banquet, they first exchanged pleasantries. After a while, they all entered their private room to toast Yang Fan and celebrate his promotion. The people who came to congratulate him were the Minister of Honor Song Ji-sen and the Minister of Imperial Servants Li Jun, who were two of the Sansi 5 dogs. Yang Fan was closer to Wu Sansi, so it was understandable that they came to toast him. However, the other officials were not Wu Sansi's people. For example, Assistant Minister of the Secretariat, Su Yuheng, a lower 4th-rank official with an important position. He was the most famous person in the court. Even the two heroes of the Wu clan, Wu Qingxi and Wu Sansi, were superior to him. He was the trusted aide of Prime Minister Li Zhaoda. For example, Junior Supervisor Jin Wucai, who was Prime Minister Su Wei's disciple. In addition, there was Minister Meng Yan, Secretary Li Guinu, Secretary Li Zhanpeng, Luo Yang, Lieutenant Tang Zong, Sun Yuxuan, and Yan Xiaojuan's eyes widened. It turned out that Yang Fan's connections were not limited to the generals in the military. He had so many friends in the court. The generals in the military, even if they were great generals with a large number of troops, did not interfere with them. They did not care. They kept a respectful distance from the Wu clan's descendants and members of the royal family. Even if those members of the royal family had official positions, they were mostly generals and had no place in the court. When Wu Qingxi became prime minister, it was a great opportunity for the Wu clan to occupy the political arena. Unfortunately, he was too hasty and returned in defeat under the counterattack of the pro-Li faction prime ministers. Wu Zetian let the Wu clan's descendants and nephews hold military positions because she understood the importance of military power to her stability. She did not allow them to enter the political arena because balance was the instinctive reaction of every ruler. Therefore, Yang Fan's 3 backers could ensure that he would not be bullied too much in the Ministry of Justice, but they could not attract enough attention from the officials of the Ministry of Justice. However, these officials who appeared at this moment were inseparable from them. Some of these people were on the same level as them, and some were even 1 or 2 levels higher than them. They all saw the respect and affection these people had for Yang Fan. When they realized that Yang Fan's connections in the political arena were even more extensive than theirs, their arrogance was swept away. They thought that they had given Yang Fan enough face by showing their faces. Yang Fan politely returned the toast to the people who came. He knew that these people were arranged by Princess Taiping to be his sedan bearers. Princess Taiping had only been involved in politics for less than 2 years, but she already had the loyalty of so many people. Yang Fan could not help but be secretly surprised. Of course, he knew that this was not all of Princess Taiping's power. This cunning woman definitely had more power that had not surfaced yet. When Yang Fan first saw Guanlu Minister Song Jishuin and Imperial Servant Minister Li Junshi, he was slightly surprised. Weren't these two Wu Sansi's people? Was he bribed by Princess Taiping? When he saw Li Guanvi and Li Zhanpeng, he faintly understood. Having known Wan'er for so long, of course he knew that Wan'er had some people by her side. For example, the secretary Li Guanu and the scholar Li Zhanpeng had always been close to Wan'er. They should be Wan'er's people. Judging from this, Princess Taiping had deliberately used some tricks to let her people invite other officials to come with her in order to confuse the public. She was afraid that her real strength would be exposed. After all, Wu Zetian was also paying close attention to Yang Fan. Who knew if the Empress would suddenly send someone to check who Yang Fan was drinking with? Wu Zetian was firmly against her daughter interfering in politics. Once she found out, the consequences would be dire. Even if they belonged to different groups, as long as the two groups were not at each other's throats, it was common for colleagues to invite each other to a banquet. Naturally, they could easily invite other officials, and they were very respectful to Yang Fan, so the people they invited had to give them some face. In this way, even if someone paid attention to it, they would only see Wu Sansi, the bright light bulb that shone as high as 300 degrees. Thus, the forces that belonged to Princess Taiping and Shangguan would also be marked by him. Taiping's meticulous mind and cautious character could be seen from this. Su Yuheng, Jin Wucai, and the others entered the private room. They didn't say anything, nor did they do anything. They just walked in when Yang Fan, Sun Yuxuan, and Yan Xiaojun were chatting with each other. They very cordially and courteously toasted Yang Fan, said a few words of congratulations, and then nodded to Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun in a cultured and refined manner before turning around and leaving. The way Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun looked at Yang Fan was very different. This was the effect Yang Fan wanted. If you relied on others for everything, even if you had a powerful backer, others would only respect you, fear you, and give you some face because of the person behind you, but they would never cooperate with you on equal terms. What Yang Fan wanted was an opportunity for Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun, these two professional fence-sitters, to take him seriously. If he wanted to open up his own world in the Ministry of Justice, he could only rely on his own fists and kicks to open up the situation. External forces were just a kind of push. At this moment, the most excited person was Feng Shihui. He knew that this was Yang Fan's first real step into the Ministry of Justice, and the connections and power Yang Fan had demonstrated were somewhat beyond his estimation. He believed that if Yang Fan could really take charge of the Ministry of Justice, he would certainly be promoted to a higher level. He was looking forward to the moment when he would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat after not making a sound for 3 years. When he walked out of the intoxicated golden hairpin, Yang Fan was very tired. This kind of tiredness was mental. When he first entered the imperial court, he was in the army. In the army, things were relatively simpler. Whatever he said, whatever he did, he was straightforward. He was rarely like the civil officials who liked to carefully probe, beat around the bush, and confess in a roundabout way. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. He could only use the same method to communicate with Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun. If he used two straightforward methods, the two would think he was a hothead without subtlety and leave in fright. Even though he was a bit tired, when Yang Fan walked out of the intoxicated golden hairpin, he was very satisfied. Today's banquet had completely achieved its goal. It was impossible to make Dr. Sun and Dr. Yan bow their heads to him just by showing such a hand. Not to mention that Chen Dong had more power than him. There was also the ambiguous assistant minister, Chui, above him. He only needed Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun to maintain their neutrality under normal circumstances and express a bit of support at the crucial moment. He was the doctor of the Ministry of Justice. If he wanted to establish his authority in the Ministry of Justice, the most effective method was to challenge Chen Dong's authority. This was also the only method. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, more than 10 days had passed. Early this morning, in Assistant Minister Chui's meeting room, the 4 secretaries sat upright. Chui Yuanzong sat at the head, and the head of the Ministry of Justice, Feng Shihui, sat at the very bottom, weekly reading from the records on the table. This was the rule of the Ministry of Justice. Every 10 days, the Ministry of Justice would take out all the cases of death penalty and above and have the main hall of the Ministry of Justice gather with the chief officials of the various departments to discuss. If any official felt that a case had been handled improperly, they could bring it up for everyone to discuss. If the main hall of the Ministry of Justice or more than half of the judicial officials raised objections, the case would be retried. This was a summary of the routine work of the past 10 days. In reality, the chief officials of each department were responsible for their own work, and rarely would they criticize the work of others. If someone wanted to ask for a favor outside the law, they would have already communicated with the official in charge of the case in private, who would make things difficult during an official meeting. Because of this was a meaningless summary meeting. Ever since Yang Fan came to the Ministry of Justice, he had participated in this kind of meeting twice. Every time, it was Su Shu who entered the Chow camp without saying a word. However, it was the same for other people. Usually, a chief would read the case, and the chief officials of each department would not shake their heads or nod as if they were not awake. As the main hall of the Ministry of Justice, Chui Yuanzong would sometimes ask a few questions. The doctors would say, "This official has no objections." Chui Yuanzong would then ask someone to read the next case. Even the other chief officials of the Ministry of Justice were too lazy to participate in this kind of meaningless thing. Naturally, this task was given to Feng Shihui, who had the least authority. This was the third 10 days meeting that Yang Fan had participated in. He decided to make things difficult for Qindong today. The day before yesterday, through Feng Shihui, he had carefully understood all the death penalty cases that had been handled in the past 10 days. The breakthrough he chose was the case of the North Market magistrate, Ing Tu, who had beaten the commoner Qin Xiaobai. Ing Tu was the North Market magistrate, one of the 3 cities in Luoyang. Don't underestimate this 8th-rank official. The management of the market was very lucrative. It was impossible to get such a lucrative job without background. Yang Fan had already investigated. Ing Tu's backer was a vice minister of the Ministry of Appointments. When Qin Xiaobai was shopping in North City, he got into an argument with a shop assistant. That shop had a close relationship with Ing Tu's day. As the magistrate, Ing Tu came out to maintain order. Qin Xiaobai was not a kind person. He actually cursed out loud. Ing Tu was furious and ordered people to take him down. After a beating, he was beaten to death on the spot. It involved human life. This was a case above the death penalty. However, Dr. Chin of the Ministry of Justice's decision was acquitted. The reason was that Ing Tu, as a magistrate, had the responsibility of maintaining order in the market. Qin Xiaobai resisted the magistrate and disturbed the peace. Ing Tu used the cane to punish Qin Xiaobai. Qin Xiaobai's body was weak. The strength of the cane used was different, which was why he died. Therefore, even though Ing Tu was suspected of using improper punishment, he did not kill intentionally or negligently. Because he was performing official duties, he was not punished. The main reason why the pardon was passed smoothly was that the victim's family did not pursue the matter. In this aspect, Yang Fan had already secretly investigated. He knew that the deceased Qin Xiaobai's wife had received a large amount of money from the other party. Therefore, they had made a private settlement. According to the laws of the Great Zhou dynasty, making a private settlement was also a crime. If he could turn Qin Xiaobai's case around, he could also touch the vice minister of the Ministry of Appointments. In this battle, he was not only challenging Chen Quan's authority, but it also involved the officials of the Ministry of Appointments. As long as he succeeded in this battle, he could bring down Qindong and establish his authority in the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice was in charge of criminal law. If he wanted to establish his authority here, of course he had to work on the law, just like how establishing authority in the army was nothing more than military achievements. Yang Fan was ready to make trouble. Chapter 420. Feng Shihui's hypnotic voice was still going on, without any cadence or pause. He had yet to read the case of Ing Tu, the magistrate of the town, killing the commoner Qin Xiaobai. He was now reading the case of a mother-in-law beating and killing her daughter-in-law. Because there was no case that he could use to make things difficult for him, Yang Fan, like the other officials, looked down and seemed to be dozing off. However, a sentence suddenly floated into his ears. The son of the deceased, Chang Yuan, said that on the night of the Double Seventh Festival, he accompanied his mother to Ding Ding Long Street and was harassed by this man with the surname Pan. The huge gambling debt that his father owed was also owned by this man with the surname Pan. Yang Fan was startled and immediately pricked up his ears. Feng Shihui continued to speak weakly. Yang Fan had only heard the second half of the story, but he had already understood the gist of it. It seemed that a man called Chang Lin had married a woman named Chang. Her name was Yun Anai. This woman was beautiful and attracted the covetous eyes of a man with the surname Pan. Therefore, the man with the surname Pan made use of Chang Lin's gambling addiction and lured him into a huge debt. Then he forced him to give up his wife. Chang Lin was unable to repay the debt and returned home to complain to his wife, who knew that Cheng's wife was an extremely chaste woman and would rather die than comply. Chang Lin knew that he was in the wrong and did not dare to force himself on his wife. The man with the surname Pan then sent a group of ruffians to their house every day to demand for the debt, harassing and smashing things up. When Chang Lin's mother, Madame Doe, found out that it was her daughter-in-law who went on the long street on the night of the Double Seventh Festival that attracted the attention of the man with the surname Pan, she scolded her daughter-in-law for being a jinx and a vixen for harming her precious son. This old woman was also a very unruly mother-in-law. After a round of beating, she actually hit her daughter-in-law's vitals and beat her to death. This turned into a murder case and was reported to the Luoyang government. The Luoyang government's trial was very straightforward and sentenced the old woman to pay with her life. However, cases of banishment and above had to be reviewed by the Ministry of Justice, so the case was reported to the Ministry of Justice. The disciplinary officer, Qin Dong, had an objection to this case. His verdict was, a superior beating a subordinate is not a fight. Moreover, the old woman had a son, and the deceased was his son's wife. If he killed his mother because of his wife, it would not be filial. Because the old woman is old, once she is exiled to a foreign land, it is tantamount to throwing away her life, which violates the original intention of reducing her crime by one level. Therefore, the sentence is reduced by one level to imprisonment, and she is sentenced to work in the Sinong Temple for 2 years to atone for her crime. Because the starting point of Chen Dong's judgment was filial piety, and filial piety was the great Tao that everyone from the emperor to the officials and even the people of the world had to abide by. It was the cornerstone of ethics and morality. So Cui Yuanzong did not have any objections. He had already done a preliminary reading and was waiting for the ministers to discuss it today before sending it to the Luoyang prefecture for execution. After Feng Shihui finished reading the case, he raised his head slightly and took a sip of water to moisten his throat. Assistant Minister Cui waited for a while. Seeing that no one spoke, he cleared his throat and asked, "Does anyone have any opinions?" This lowly official wishes to take another look at the dossier. Because this case was concluded by Qin Dong, he did not need to express his opinion. Pai Erding, Sun Yuxuan, and Yen Xiaojun, the 3 doctors, were just about to cup their hands and say, "This lowly official has no objections." As per usual, Yang Fan spoke first. In this kind of routine meeting, it was already extremely rare to raise an objection to a case, but the one who raised the objection was actually Yang Fan, the second cult leader of the Ministry of Justice, who was publicly recognized as ignorant and incompetent. Cui Yuanzong could not help but look at him in astonishment. Feng Shihui was also somewhat astonished, This is not the case that Yang Longjong had chosen to make things difficult for. Didn't I already agree with Yang Longjong? Why did he change his mind at the last minute? He looked at Yang Fan with some surprise, thinking that Yang Fan had remembered wrongly. However, Yang Fan smiled warmly at him and said slowly, "Manager Feng, please let me read the dossier." Oh yes. In front of all the officers, Feng Shihui could not give him a hint by winking, so he could only bring the dossier in front of him. The dossier was open. Yang Fan flipped to the first page and carefully read it. Qin Dong saw his behavior and could not help but raise his eyebrows slightly. Pai Erding glanced at Cui Yuanzong. Cui Yuanzong's face was expressionless, but when he looked at the slightly uncomfortable Qin Dong, and then looked at Yang Fan, who had his head lowered and was seriously reading the dossier, a trace of understanding flashed through his eyes. Whether it was Chen Dong or Yang Fan, they were both obstacles to his sole control of the Ministry of Justice. However, Chen Dong had a deep foundation in the Ministry of Justice, and Yang Fan had many backers. With Cui Yuanzong's boldness, he did not have the guts to start an all-out war with them. Now that these two tigers were going to fight, Cui Yuanzong was happy to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. He slightly lowered his eyelids and gently stroked his beard without saying a word. Seeing this, Pai Erding also had the idea of sitting on the mountain and watching the tigers fight. Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun looked at each other. Both of them had a ruminating expression on their faces. The room was quiet. Occasionally there would be a gulp sound, but it was the sound of Feng Shihui drinking water. Feng Shihui also did not expect that he could drink water so clearly at this time. Seeing everyone looking at him, he could not help but smile awkwardly. It really is her. Yang Fan saw Chang Zuan, the son of the Chang family who had provided the testimony in the dossier, mentioned that on the night of the Double Seventh Festival his mother was molested by the Pan surnamed Foppish, and was subsequently rescued by a man who claimed to be from the Ministry of Justice. From this, he knew that the deceased was the woman he met that night. Yang Fan closed his eyes, and the appearance of the woman suddenly appeared in front of him. She had a slender figure, fair skin, a slender waist, and a slender neck. She was as clean and translucent as a duck's egg that had its shell peeled. Although his son was already 13 or 14 years old and had a strong head, she looked to be only 25 or 26. She was dignified, refined, and exceptionally beautiful. That day was the Double Seventh Festival. While it was true that the Double Seventh Festival was a festival for lovers, the common people had their own festivals to celebrate, and they would not let go of this rare occasion where the curfew was lifted and the streets were filled with merriment. But on that day, this woman called Qing Yenny had brought her son Chang Ziyuan out to play. But where was her husband, Chang Lin? From this testimony, it could be seen that Chang Lin was a gambling addict. He was extremely fond of gambling, and most of the money he earned from working at the docks was spent on gambling. His family still relied on his wife's needlework to supplement their income. That night, when his wife was molested, he was probably at a gambling den, throwing dice with bloodshot eyes. This man, surnamed Pan, was clearly the youngest son of the assistant counselor of the Ministry of Personnel, Pan Jinny. The dossier did not mention a single word about his family background. Even though it could not be said that the officials were protecting each other, it was still a taboo for his father. The assistant counselor of the Ministry of Personnel was indeed not a high-ranking official in the capital, but his authority was not small. He was in charge of assessing the achievements of officials, and if there was no other choice, no one would be willing to offend him. The dossier did not mention how to deal with this man surnamed Pan, and this was something that Yang Fan could not do anything about. Even if he wanted to pursue the matter, there was no way to do so. It was true that Pan Jinny had molested Qing Yenny on the street, but he had not done it in public. How should he deal with this? After the incident, his lustful desires did not stop, and he even set up a gambling den to lure Chang Lin in. His intentions were very clear, but he did not break the law. In the end, one was willing to be beaten, and the other was willing to be beaten. In this case, only one person died, and it was the most innocent woman. She was tempted by lust, set up a trap, and walked the boundaries of the criminal law. Gambling addicts who fell into the trap were hateful but could not be punished. The old woman was obviously extremely crafty, and she was biased towards her son, but she vented her anger on her innocent daughter-in-law and beat her to death. Such a fresh life, such a respectable woman, died just like that. How innocent that woman was. How unfair the heavenly axiom was. A ball of anger burned fiercely in Yang Fan's heart. He slammed the dossier shut, raised his head, and said solemnly to Cui Yuanzong, "Assistant Minister, this lowly official thinks the Director Chen's judgment is really unfair." As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun did not know that Yang Fan was going to make trouble today, and they did not know what he had chosen to break out of. However, after the golden hairpin drunkenness incident, they knew that Yang Fan would make trouble for Qindong sooner or later. At this moment, when they heard this, their eyes instantly lit up. It has finally begun. They wanted to see Yang Fan's methods, and Feng Shihui was the only one who knew that Yang Fan had already chosen which case to use to make trouble for Qindong. For this reason, he had even helped Yang Fan find a law book with sufficient evidence, and asked Yang Fan to carefully memorize it and use it as a basis for his rebuttal. Who knew that Yang Fan would suddenly, as if he was possessed, choose the wrong case. Feng Shihui was so anxious that he coughed repeatedly, but Yang Fan turned a deaf ear to him. Instead, Yang Fan looked at him meaningfully. Feng Shihui's heart trembled, and he did not dare to speak. Assistant Minister Cui slowly stroked his beard and asked softly, "I wonder what Yang Longzhong thinks is wrong with the case that Director Qin has decided." These days, Yang Fan had not been idle at home. Every night, the only thing he did was to memorize all kinds of cases and their legal principles that he might encounter within the scope of his duties. Right now, he still could not think of all kinds of laws as soon as he used them. Although he had forcefully memorized all kinds of laws in his mind, when he needed to use specific related laws, he still needed to first think of the general category of laws in his mind, and then refine it down to some specific legal provisions. He knew that this was his shortcoming, so when he flipped through more than half of the file, he still pretended to read the file seriously, but in reality he was already thinking of the laws that could be used. At this time, when Cui Yuanzong asked, Yang Fan immediately answered, "According to the Zhou law, the third paragraph of the section on fighting and litigation, if an elder beats a lowly child, injures the injured, the punishment will be reduced by 1 rank. If it is a small merit or a great merit, the punishment will be reduced by 1 rank. If a person dies from beating, the elder will be hanged." Word by word, Yang Fan recited the law that just happened to be applicable, and then said, "According to the law, if the old woman of the Chang family beats or even cripples her daughter-in-law, because she is an elder, her punishment can be reduced by 1 rank. But according to the law, even if she is an elder, the person who causes the death will be sentenced to hanging. Therefore, this lowly official thinks that Director Chen's judgment is very wrong." Cui Yuanzong slightly narrowed his eyes, and after listening to Yang Fan, a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. They all knew how Yang Fan became an official and how he became a military officer, so they had never thought that he actually understood the law. Cui Yuanzong seemed to see Yang Fan for the first time, and looked at him seriously, then turned to Qindong and asked, "Director Qin, what do you have to say?" Chapter 421. When Yang Fan had spoken just now, Qindong had not uttered a single word. This was not because Qindong was able to maintain his composure in the face of the questioning of a junior and layman of the law, but because these were the rules. Yang Fan's statement was a questioning of him. Regardless of whether it was a questioning or an impeachment, as long as a superior was present and the other party's words were directed at the superior, he could not immediately refute before the other party finished speaking and the superior began to question him. It was the same in the imperial court. If an imperial censor reported against you, you could only listen from the side. Even if what he said was completely nonsensical and non-existent, you could only maintain your silence before the censor finished speaking and the emperor questioned you. You absolutely could not jump out halfway through the other party's statement and start spitting saliva at the censor with a flushed face and neck. While Yang Fan was narrating, Qin was also anxiously thinking of how to phrase his words. At this point, how could he not understand that Yang Fan, who had been pretending to be a pig for nearly a month, was now starting to eat the tiger? Thus, Qin reaction was also extremely cautious. Qin thought carefully for a moment and cupped his hands at Cui Yuanzong. Assistant Minister, this lowly official's judgment is naturally somewhat inappropriate from a legal point of view. However, this lowly official has been in the Justice Department for many years, so how could I not be familiar with this kind of law? This lowly official's judgment was made after careful consideration. Cui Yuanzong smiled slightly. Speak. Qin glanced disdainfully at Yang Fan and said, "The law is nothing more than human emotions. This case is not a simple murder case, but rather a mother-in-law disciplining her daughter-in-law. She was too heavy-handed and caused death. In terms of filial piety, the relationship between parents is greater than that between husband and wife. In this case, Chong Lin has already lost his wife. If his mother was killed because of his wife, wouldn't it go against nature and go against filial piety? Moreover, Chong Lin's mother originally had no intention of killing, and it was a mistake. Moreover, she was already advanced in age, so this lowly official's judgment was reduced by one level." He smiled and casually added, "This case has already been reported to the assistant minister. Since the assistant minister has approved of this lowly official's judgment, I believe that this lowly official understands this lowly official's painstaking efforts to promote filial piety." Cui Yuanzong stroked his beard and smiled non-committally. He then turned to Yang Fan and asked, "What does Yang Longzhong think of Dr. Chen's explanation?" Yang Fan said calmly, "I think it's ridiculous." "Oh." Cui Yuanzong chuckled and said, "Tell me your reason." Yang Fan said, "The law is nothing more than human feelings." On this point, Yang completely agrees, advocating filial piety. This Yang completely agrees with this. However, this lowly official believes that a favor is not the same as abusing it. To promote filial piety, one must not do things that go against the harmony of heaven and go against humanity in the name of filial piety. Otherwise, that would be false filial piety. If it was purely a lecture, it was impossible for Yang Fan's understanding of the law to surpass that of Qin, who had worked in the legal profession for most of his life. However, when it came to the sharpness of the tongue, he was not inferior to Qin in the slightest. The huge pit that Qin had dug had been easily and skillfully circumvented with a single sentence. The pit that Qin had dug was filial piety. Moreover, he had been shouting all day that the dignity of the law could not be violated. Had he done it? What would the situation be like 1,000 years ago? That was a society ruled by men where power was greater than the law. And these people who held power all placed filial piety at the top of all the virtues. If Yang Fan stubbornly acted as a legal warrior and shouted that the law could not be violated, and that since the law stipulated that the old woman should be sentenced to death by hanging, then he could pack up and go home. If this lawsuit was brought to Wu Zetian, he could forget about winning. Which was more important between the life and death of a wicked old woman and upholding filial piety? Yang Fan said, "From the confession of the Chong family's son, Madame Cheng did not do anything wrong. The one who set up a trap was the man surnamed Pan, and the one who was addicted to gambling and owed a huge debt was Chong Lin himself. The old woman from the Chong family vented her anger on her daughter-in-law and actually beat an innocent woman to death." At this point, Yang Fan felt miserable. He had received the murder case that the Ministry of Justice had already investigated the day before yesterday, but this case had only been concluded yesterday. Therefore, the case was not included in the case files he had received beforehand. He only found out about this murder case now. When he thought of how the innocent woman he saw on the night of Chinese Valentine's Day had been beaten to death by her unreasonable mother-in-law. His emotions surged, and he found it hard to calm down. Yang Fan cupped his fists and said, "Assistant Minister, does it mean that parents absolutely cannot commit crimes, or that they can take their children's life and death? There is no such provision in the laws of the great Zhou dynasty. There are all kinds of parents in the world, and that is only for their children. The one who should be filial is Chonglin, so it is human nature for Chonglin not to sue. It is also human nature for Chonglin's son, Chong Ziyuan, to sue his grandmother for killing his mother. Moreover, this case was brought to the attention of Basho and Marquis Wu due to the indignation of the common people, who then reported it to the Luoyang government. It has nothing to do with Chonglin and his son, Chong Ziyuan. What is the Ministry of Justice? Why does the imperial court need to establish the Ministry of Justice? Isn't it just to manage the injustice of the world? Isn't it to bring the grievances of the common people that cannot be resolved by themselves to the law, so that the imperial court can uphold justice? Director Qin is not the son of that unreasonable old woman, so who is he being filial on behalf of? Moreover, he is using the life of Madame Cheng, so who is he being generous? Yang Fan waved his sleeves and said in a clear voice that shook the roof tiles, "Therefore, this lowly official believes that Director Qin, under the guise of fake filial piety, caused an innocent to die in vain and should be retried." Yang Fan's words were powerful and resonant, and the last few words were like the sound of metal and stone, piercing directly into the hearts of the people. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone in the meeting hall was moved. In the silence, no one made a sound for a long time. After a long time, Cui Yuanzong took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Director Chen and Yang Longzhong each have their own arguments, so it is not good for this official to make a decision. How about this? Let's have a discussion. This case, should we retry it?" Qin Dong sat there with a cold smile on his face, a hint of disdain on his face. Yang Fan's words were quite touching, but the people present were all bureaucrats who had been through the ups and downs of officialdom for many years, not those ignorant commoners on the streets. A few words could make their blood boil, and they would be at the mercy of others if they were hot-headed. In the officialdom, which one of them did not put the word benefit first and weigh it again and again? Would anyone agree with Yang Fan's opinion? Yang Fan? What is that? Would someone take the risk of offending him and stand on Yang Fan's side? Chen Dong gently curled his lips and picked up the cup of water on the table. The water was already warm and not scalding, but he still pretended to blow on it a few times. Then he gently raised his eyelids and lightly swept his gaze over Yang Fan. The air of provocation was extremely thick. "Ahem." Sun Yuxuan lightly coughed and said, "Assistant Minister, in this lowly official's opinion, since there are still disputes in this case, why not retry it?" Qin Dong was startled and looked at him with some surprise. This fence-sitter, how come he has his own opinion today? Sun Yuxuan smiled with a harmless expression on his face, as if he was trying to smooth things over. That day he had already seen Yang Fan's connections, and he had already calculated it clearly. At this time, speaking up for Yang Fan was like sending charcoal in snowy weather to Yang Fan. If Yang Fan could become powerful, he would have one more friend and one more path. Right now, Qin Dong had the upper hand. If he stood on Qin Dong's side, it would only be the icing on the cake. At most, he would go back and get a good look from Qin Dong. What else could he do? If he helped Yang Fan smooth things over at this time, and Yang Fan still lost, because today's action was not as important to Qin Dong as it was to Yang Fan. At most, they would not be too harmonious in the future, and he would not anger Qin Dong too much. Yan Xiaojun had the same idea as him, but he hesitated for a moment, and Sun Yuxuan beat him to it. If he spoke again, he wouldn't be able to be as calm as Sun Yuxuan, so he was a little annoyed. However, he did not know that the reason why Sun Yuxuan spoke first was because he drank Yang Fan's free wine every noon and was a little embarrassed to hide behind. He covered his mouth and coughed twice, then said to Cui Yuanzong, Assistant Minister, a person's life is related to the heavens. This lowly official thinks that it is better to be cautious and re-examine the case. Other than Chui Yuanzong, who was the assistant minister, there were a total of 5 doctors present. Now that Yang Fan and Qin Dong had made their stand clear, and Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun both agreed to re-examine the case, 3 of the 5 doctors agreed to re-examine it. Whether Pai Erding expressed his stance or not, this case was destined to be re-examined. Pai Erding did not want to express his stance. He was Chui Yuanzong's man, and in his opinion the battle between Yang Fan and Qin Dong was a dog-eat-dog situation. It did not matter who killed who. It was best if both of them died at the same time. However, Chui Yuanzong was secretly shocked. This Yang Fan is very scheming. Since when did he rope in Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun to be on his side? And I did not notice at all. Chui Yuanzong secretly raised his guard and said with a smile, "If that is the case, then this case should be re-examined." Qin Dong did not expect Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun to speak up for Yang Fan. Ever since Chui Yuanzong entered the Ministry of Justice, these 2 fence-sitters had pledged their allegiance to him. However, their allegiance was only to follow Chui Yuanzong's arrangements and not to drag Chui Yuanzong down. They had never stood up for Chui Yuanzong and made things difficult for him. Who would have thought that today? Qin Dong thought anxiously. Could it be that Chui Yuanzong saw that he could not bring me down and has the intention to use the tiger to swallow the wolf? He wants to use Yang Fan to be my enemy, and he can reap the benefits from his position? Hearing Chui Yuanzong say that the case would be re-examined, Qin Dong was also angry. He said stiffly, "Assistant Minister, my judgment is based on evidence. I do not agree with what Yang Longzhong said. Even if this case is re-examined, I will still make the same judgment." Chui Yuanzong said with a smile, "Since Yang Longzhong has objections, I will naturally send it to Yang Longzhong for a re-examination." Qin Dong was stunned and felt great regret. This old fox, he actually took the opportunity to bite me. Ever since Chui Yuanzong entered the Ministry of Justice, he had been hindered many times by him. Now that he had made a fool of him, Chui Yuanzong was very happy. He stood up with a smile and said, "All right, we have wasted too much time today. Let's call it a day. We will discuss the rest of the files in the next 10 days. With that said, he flicked his sleeves and walked away. This old dog, he did it on purpose. He used Yang Fan to fight with me. No matter who won or lost, he would clean up the mess. Qin Dong returned to his office and immediately cursed. The scribes and yamen runners stood in the outer hall. They knew that he was cursing at the main hall, but they could only pretend to be ignorant. At this moment, Luo Ling ran in like a wisp of smoke. He naturally knew that Qin Dong had suffered a setback, but he was actually beaming with joy. "Doctor, doctor, something big has happened." Luo Ling tiptoed to Qin Dong's ear and muttered something. Qin Dong was startled and asked, "Really?" Luo Ling nodded and said, "Absolutely." Qin Dong sneered and said darkly, "You want to use this case to diminish my prestige? Unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. Now, this case has become a hot potato. Even if you want to throw it to me, I won't take it." Chapter 4:22. Might. Once he finished shouting, a few bailiffs stood on both sides of the hall. Their wind and fire rods clattered on the ground without any rhythm. Yang Fan walked out from behind the screen in a new official's robe. Feng Shihui's face was ashen as he walked up to him. His lips trembled as he said, "Doctor, look! This is too much." Yang Fan scanned the situation in the hall and couldn't help but feel angry. It seemed like he was going to suffer the same fate as Pai Erding. He took a deep breath and quickly calmed down. With a pleasant expression, he asked, "What happened?" Feng Shihui pointed to the front of the hall. His finger was still trembling. "More than half of the bailiffs on duty aren't here. They say they suddenly fell ill. Even the scribes who are taking notes aren't here. They also say they fell ill. Doctor, what are they? Don't worry, don't worry. Yang Fan patted him on the shoulder and grinned. He walked up the steps with a smile, turned to the back of the desk, held the desk with both hands, looked around, and slowly sat down. Yang Fan's 2 hands lightly tapped on the table for a while. He had an idea in his mind. The corner of his mouth slightly revealed a trace of a smile, and his voice became truly calm. "Monitor! Your humble servant is here." One of the bailiffs stepped forward and bowed. "Doctor, your humble servant is Deputy Monitor Yuan Han. Our monitor's name is Mo Chiu." "Oh, Deputy Monitor Yuan. Monitor Mo and the other bailiffs who haven't arrived yet, where are they?" Deputy Monitor Yuan hugged his wind and fire rod and cupped his hands. "Doctor, Monitor Mo, and the other bailiffs who haven't arrived yet have suddenly fallen ill. They're vomiting and have diarrhea, so they've taken sick leave." Yang Fan frowned. "How come I didn't know about this?" Deputy Monitor Yuan hesitated and said, "Doctor, Monitor Mo, and the others have already taken sick leave from Dr. Chin." "Oh!" Yang Fan pretended to be enlightened. He turned his head and asked Feng Shihui, "Manager Feng, has there ever been such a case of so many officials in the Ministry of Justice being infected at the same time?" Feng Shihui said angrily, "Never." Yang Fan quickly pressed his hands together and said, "Don't be impatient. Calm down." Yang Fan stuck out his chest and said, "In one yamen, half of the officials are sick at the same time. This kind of thing Ben Guan has never heard of before. You guys are so muddle-headed. Why do you still look so muddle-headed? Huh?" Feng Shihui and Vice Class Leader Yuan were stunned. They looked at him in a daze, not understanding what he was talking about. Yang Fan looked solemnly at the sparse scribes and nobles in the hall and said, "There are only 2 possibilities for such a situation. First, there is a plague. Second, the food in the kitchen was not clean. If it's just the food in the public kitchen that's not clean, then it's only our yamen's problem. But if it's a plague, then it's serious." Ah. Feng Shihui and Vice Class Leader Yuan were stunned at the same time, but Feng Shihui immediately reacted. If it weren't for the fact that this was not a suitable place to laugh, he would have laughed out loud and raised both of his thumbs. "Brilliant, really brilliant. Who said that our Yang Longzhong is a martial artist? This is quite the demeanor of a scholar like me." After Yang Fan finished speaking, he suddenly asked Yuan Han, "Have you brought Chong Lin and his son?" Vice Class Leader Yuan was still thinking about the problem of the food being dirty and the outbreak of a plague. He didn't expect Yang Fan's thoughts to jump so quickly, and his brain couldn't keep up. He hurriedly replied, "No, Chong Lin is not at the docks. I heard that he went to gamble after he finished his work." Yang Fan stared at him and said, "Gambling is not an evil act. How can the people at the docks not know where he gambles? Why can't they find him?" Vice Class Leader Yuan avoided his gaze and replied with some fear, "Doctor, the people who were sent to bring Chong Lin to the docks did not find him." Yang Fan smiled and said, "Oh, that's good too." Vice Class Leader Yuan, "Yes, sir. From now on, you will temporarily take over the position of Vice Class Leader." Yuan Han stammered. Then Vice Class Leader Mo. Yang Fan said sternly, "Vice Class Leader Mo needs to be quarantined. All public servants who have contracted a plague must be quarantined." Yuan Han's heart skipped a beat. He thought to himself, how ruthless. Isn't he afraid of offending everyone? Quarantining was an epidemic prevention system that had been popular since the northern and southern dynasties. Once a person was quarantined, they would naturally not be able to work in the yamen. If they couldn't work, then they would not be able to receive their salaries, allowances, and even food. Money was a small problem. The problem was that once they were quarantined, they would have to be given an empty house and guarded together. What did that mean? It meant that people who were suspected of contracting the plague would have to leave their houses and move to the wilderness. They would have to build a few thatched huts for them and throw some food into the huts every day. They would leave them to their own devices and only return home when they were sure that they were fine. Yang Fan said sternly, "This is the capital city, the residence of the emperor. There are millions of people here. How can we not pay attention to the possibility of a plague?" He coldly swept his gaze across the hall and said, "Scribe, write this down." The scribe was sitting behind a small table and was in a daze with his mouth open. When he heard the word "write down," he quickly spread out a piece of paper and picked up his brush. He did not dare to hesitate at all. Yang Fan also did not sit behind the table. He stood up and slowly paced in the hall. He thought for a while and said, "I said you will do the polishing." The scribe hurriedly replied respectfully, "Yes, sir." Yang Fan said, "Even though we do not know if the people who are suffering from an emergency in my yamen are suffering from a plague, but once there are symptoms, we cannot be negligent. This has always been the rule of the imperial court. Therefore, I have the following measures. Assistant Minister Chui of my yamen, the Luoyang Magistrate, the Imperial Medicine Bureau, the Imperial Physician Bureau, the Medicine Depository Bureau, the Hanlin Academy Medical waiting for Imperial Edict, the Malady Square, and other yamens, please consult and report to the Political Affairs Hall." The scribe's hand trembled and left a blob of ink on the paper. There were some things that could be done under the table, but they could not be brought up to the table. Otherwise, they would be breaking the unspoken rules of the entire profession and would incur public anger. But Yang Fan used the pretense of preventing the plague and did not mention a word about the dirty relationship between him and Qindong. This was very open and above board. Yang Fan lightly slapped his forehead and thought as he walked. He then said, "The imperial court will take care of the matters outside. The matter will be reported to the imperial court and it will be handled by the imperial court. Let's just talk about the yamen of the Ministry of Justice. First, check the public kitchen. Food must be stopped from today onwards. Everyone can go out for lunch. Only when it is confirmed that there are no problems with the public kitchen and that no one is suffering from the plague can the public kitchen be reopened to ensure safety." The scribe's hand trembled again. Yang Fan stared at him. He quickly lowered his head and continued writing, no longer looking at Yang Fan. Yang Fan continued, "Secondly, carry out a major cleanup of the yamen. Mud, dirty water, sewage, and latrines must all be thoroughly cleaned out. This is to prevent stagnant qi and the plague from growing. The third point is isolation. Everyone who reported to be sick today, please ask the Luoyang Prefecture and the Malady Square to come forward and quarantine them in the countryside. They will be given medicine to prevent the spread of the plague. Fourthly, if there is anyone in the yamen who is listless and sick, immediately quarantine them. The yamen runners who are standing crookedly on both sides immediately straighten their bodies. Fifthly, please ask the Imperial Medical Bureau and the Imperial Medical Bureau to immediately prepare a medicinal soup for the epidemic and distribute it to everyone in the yamen to drink every day. Also, distribute it to all the yamen offices in the 3 provinces and 6 departments." The yamen runners who had straightened their bodies immediately grinned, as if they had just swallowed a mouthful of yellow lotus. This is all I can think of for now. Have you written it all down?" The scribe nodded his head like a chick pecking at rice. He repeatedly said, "I've written it down, I've written it down." Yang Fan said, "Make another copy immediately." The scribe agreed. He hurriedly grinded his brush and quickly made a copy. Yang Fan took a copy and looked at it. He praised, "Good writing. The wording is also good." It was already autumn and the weather was not hot, but the scribe seemed to be very hot. He raised his sleeve to wipe the cold sweat on his temples and smiled sheepishly. "Dr. Zhong, you flatter me." Yang Fan rolled up the copy in his hand and stuffed it into his sleeve. He chuckled and said, "This is not flattering. I was born a military general and am a boorish man. When it comes to writing documents, I am far inferior to you." The scribe laughed dryly and did not dare to reply. Yang Fan said, "All right, Immediately send the copy on your desk to Assistant Minister Chui. Oh, oh. The scribe quickly picked up the record on his desk and ran to the back of the yamen as fast as he could. The vice chairman and acting chairman of the Ministry of Justice, Yuan Han, hesitated and asked, Dr. Zhong, our court has been promoted. Do we still need to interrogate the case? Yang Fan said, the witnesses are not complete. Even the people working in the yamen are not complete. How can we interrogate the case? Yang Fan returned to the back of the public desk and looked at the yamen runners on both sides. Although they were sparse, they had unknowingly stood tall and straight like javelins. He grabbed the gavel and slammed it down with a bang. He shouted in an imposing manner, dismissed. Ouch! The gavel slammed down. Yang Fan frowned like a delicate lady who had accidentally stretched her slender waist. He pinched an orchid with one hand and held the back of his waist with the other. He slowly sat down behind the desk. Feng Shihue and Yuan Han hurriedly stepped forward and asked nervously, Dr. Zhong, what happened to you? Yang Fan rubbed his forehead. After a long time, he gently raised his head and said with a heavy expression, I suddenly felt dizzy and my vision blurred. I feel nauseous. I am afraid. I am also infected with an acute disease. Ah! Feng Shihue and Vice Chairman Yuan were dumbfounded. Yang Fan jumped up and said with a serious expression, You should quickly step back, lest you get infected by me. I will set an example and immediately quarantine them. In order to prevent Assistant Minister from being infected, I will not ask for leave from Assistant Minister Chui. Please help me tell Assistant Minister Chui that I will go home and quarantine my whole family. Dr. Zhong, Feng Shihue, and Deputy Squad Leader Yuan eagerly watched Yang Fan stride out of the courtroom. Yang Fan waved his sleeves and left in high spirits. Looking at his energetic appearance, there was no possibility of him getting sick at all. Feng Shihue glanced at Deputy Monitor Yuan and murmured, Isn't this a little too big? Deputy Yuan sighed. There are really people who are not afraid of it. The scribe took the 5 rules of the Ministry of Justice on epidemic prevention, written by Yang Fan, but he did not go straight to Assistant Minister Chui of the back yamen. Halfway there, he turned to the Ministry of Justice and barged into Qin Dong's room. Dr. Qin, he said anxiously, It's big, this time it's big. Chapter 4:23. Qin Dong finished reading what Yang Fan had written and sneered, Go, send it to Assistant Minister Chui. The scribe stared at him blankly and hesitated. Doctor, Qin Dong said, Go. Do you think Assistant Minister Chui will let him do as he pleases? Do you think he will look good if this scandal is exposed? The scribe came to a sudden realization and hurriedly said, I will go now. The scribe rushed to the back of the yamen. Luo Ling moved closer to Qin Dong and said, Doctor, this Yang Fan is not easy to deal with. Qin Dong glanced at him and said indifferently, panicking just like that? We still have a trump card. If we can't break it with one move, humph, he will know who has the final say in the Ministry of Justice. Qin Dong put his hands behind his back and sneered. That case has been reported to the Supreme Court, right? After getting Luo Ling's confirmation, Qin Dong smiled and said, Good. After the Supreme Court is done with the trial, it will be handed over to the Ministry of Justice for review. That case is related to the one he is handling. I will see what he will do when the time comes. He patted Luo Ling's shoulder and said earnestly, A moment of pride is nothing. The one who laughs last is the winner. In the back of the yamen, Bodhisattva Chui received the document from the scribe and immediately frowned. He said unhappily, Nonsense. If there's anything inappropriate, can't you tell me? How could you create such a mess? The scribe said embarrassedly, Yang Lanzhong said that we should inform the medical bureau, the Luoyang prefecture, the Sufferer's Square. Ignore him. Chui Yuanzong's face darkened and he waved his hand. Go! Ask him to see me. Before he could finish, Feng Shihue hurried in and bowed to Chui Yuanzong, saying, Assistant Minister, Yang Longjong said that he's feeling unwell. I am afraid that he has also contracted the plague, so he has been quarantined at home. Chui Yuanzong was stunned and said angrily, He did not even inform me. Feng Shihui laughed dryly. Yang Longjong said that he might have infected the vice minister. Chui Yuanzong didn't know whether to laugh or to be angry. He pointed at him and the scribe and said, You too, go to the Yang family immediately and tell him to come see me. I'm not afraid of infection. When it was almost noon, Feng Shihui and the scribe returned. Chui Yuanzong saw that Yang Fan did not return with them. He stood up unhappily and said, Where is Yang Fan? The scribe said, Yang Longjong's movement is very fast. When lowly officer arrived at the Yang mansion and inquired, the Yang mansion's people said that Al Lang and Nyangzi had already left the mansion. Chui Yuanzong sneered. Did you imprison yourself in the countryside, or did you go sightseeing somewhere? Humph. Find out where he is and bring him back for me. Feng Shihui stepped forward and answered solemnly, Lowly officer has already inquired. Yang Longjong has gone to White Horse Temple. Chui Yuanzong sat back in his chair after hearing this. After a long while, he slowly picked up the 5 rules of the Ministry of Justice for epidemic prevention of the Yang family from the table. It seemed that he did not want to read it, but his expression was uncertain. Feng Shihui stole a glance at him and said ambiguously, Yang Longjong made 2 copies of this official document and took one with him. I don't know what is his intention. Chui Yuanzong's expression changed again. After a long silence, he said slowly, Report the epidemic prevention to the Political Affairs Hall. The scribe was shocked and was about to say something when Chui Yuanzong stopped him with a cold look. At this time, the head chef Wang Wan came in with a sumptuous plate and said politely, Vice Minister, it's time for lunch. Chui Yuanzong glared at him and said angrily, What do you want to eat? Close the kitchen. From today onwards, all lunch services will be stopped. Ah, why is that? Chui Yuanzong wanted to say something but hesitated. He first waved his hand to let Feng Shihui and the scribe leave. After the 2 left, the furious expression on Chui Yuanzong's face suddenly disappeared. He said with a relaxed smile, Don't ask too much. Just do as I say. Wang Wan was quite reluctant. Chui Yuanzong glared at him and said, Don't just stare at your small territory. Do as I say. Wang Wan had no choice but to agree and leave with the plate. Chui Yuanzong stroked his beard and thought for a moment. Then he smiled and said loudly, Come, call Minister Pai to come with me to eat outside the yamen. There was a hint of schadenfreude in Chui Yuanzong's words. That old man is really a clay statue. He's not worthy of being a magistrate. He can't do anything about Yang Fan's nonsense. When Chen Dong heard the scribe's report, he slammed the table angrily and began to wander around the room. After a while, he chuckled and comforted himself. It's nothing. Unfortunately, he still doesn't know that this case has caused another storm. Go ahead. I'll let him be complacent for now. Let's see how he deals with this. At this moment, Luo Ling rushed back in exasperation and said, Minister, the kitchen is actually closed. All the perfectly fine dishes have been poured into the bucket of swill. This, Qindong snorted and said, Let's go out and eat. In the White Horse Temple below Chiyun Tower, Yang Fan and Xiao Man were accompanied by the temple's true abbot, Master Sanshan, and the former abbot, Monk Yizhua. They walked slowly. Master Sanshan pointed at them and explained the historical sites in the temple from time to time. The White Horse Temple was the first ancient temple in China. It was the first temple built by the government after Buddhism was introduced to the Central Plains, so there were obviously many moss-covered ancient buildings and trees in the temple. Yang Fan saw Feng Shihui rush into the backyard and stand on the steps below Chiyun Tower. He smiled at Master Sanshan and bowed with his palms together. He said, Master, please. Master Sanshan bowed back at him and led Xiao Man into Qian Tower with Monkey Zhua. Yang Fan walked down the steps and arrived beside a stone bench with Feng Shihui. With a sweep of his sleeve, he brushed away a few fallen leaves and said with a smile, "Let's sit and talk." "Yes, yes." Feng Shihui was excited. He waited for Yang Fan to sit down before sitting to the side. He only placed half his, but on the stone bench to show his respect for Yang Fan. Yang Fan did not mind his careful behavior. He only asked with a smile, "How is it?" At this time, the sky was already slanting. Sunlight passed through the rustling leaves and shone on their faces, bodies, and the ground. The wind blew, and the trees moved, causing their shadows to sway gently. Within the shadows of the trees, it seemed like only the two of them were motionless. It was quite a sight to behold in the temple. However, the words the two of them spoke were unbearably vulgar. It was nothing more than the mortal methods of fighting for fame and wealth and scheming against each other. Assistant Minister Chui had no other choice. He could only send Lang Zhong's records to the Political Affairs Hall. Minister Li reported it to the emperor, and the emperor decreed that the entire city of Luoyang should be vaccinated. Our Ministry of Justice is the most important disaster area. When Feng Shihui reached this point, he could not help but laugh. Everyone in the government office was mobilized. They cleaned up every nook and cranny. They worked for 2 whole days and sprinkled lime on the damp places. That was not all. The people from the Shang pharmacy also came. Every day, they brewed medicinal soup that was more bitter than bile and forced everyone to drink it. They drank it so much that no one had the appetite to go out for lunch. Yang Fan smiled faintly. The emperor still gave him face. "Originally, you were the one who pushed me into the Ministry of Justice. Now that I have used my methods, if you do not cooperate and undermine me, then why did you let me come?" Yang Fan did not want to hear about the sorry state of the Ministry of Justice. He only asked, what was the reaction of the officials? What did Assistant Minister Chui and Lang Zhong say? Feng Shihui beamed with joy and said, "Ever since Assistant Minister Chui sent Lang Zhong's records to the Political Affairs Hall and after the emperor made his decision, he has become a clay bodhisattva again. He doesn't care what the higher-ups do. He doesn't care how the lower levels complain, as if nothing has happened. It looks like he wants to watch from the sidelines." Yang Fan smiled and interrupted. "He did not want me to go back." Feng Shihui chuckled and said, "Why wouldn't I want to? It's just that when he heard that Lang Zhong entered White Horse Temple, he would not dare to come back even if you lent him the courage." Yang Fan gently stroked his knee and thought for a moment. He then asked, "What about Qindong?" Feng Shihui said, "Dr. Qin is still stubbornly holding on. There's no need to talk about Assistant Minister Chui's speechlessness. But Pai Erding is taking this opportunity to attack him with all his might. In the beginning, everyone's meals were cut off, and they suffered, and they still have a lot of complaints against Dr. Qin. But they can't do anything to you, and they can't extricate themselves. Under Pai Erding's instigation, this resentment naturally concentrated on Qindong. As for Sun Yuxuan and Yan Xiaojun, they are very slippery. Right now, Assistant Minister Chui is silent, and you, the main character, is not here. They will not do anything to offend Qindong, but they will also not support him. Hey, even a lowly guard in the yamen is not an idiot. They are not doing anything. Their attitude is already clear enough. Who would not see it? Now, the wind is gradually leaning towards Lang Zhong. Do you think it is time to go back and clean up the mess?" Yang Fan frowned and said, No. Don't talk to me about the excitement. Those things on the surface are actually useless. We are dealing with Qindong, so the most important thing is his reaction. Has he not panicked yet?" When Yang Fan said this, Feng Shihui couldn't help but frown. Yes, the strange thing is that he really does not seem to be panicking. It is one thing for these things to torment him. Also, Those scribes and yamen servants who were instigated by him to claim they were sick and did not come when Lang Zhong was questioning the case were all taken to the desolate countryside and locked up. Every day, they would throw some salted vegetables and flatbread in. The parents and brothers of these people found out from somewhere that the reason their loved ones were like this was all because they were instigated by Chen Dong to go against you, the Minister of Justice. So they went to him every day to make a fuss, telling him to save their loved ones. They said all sorts of unpleasant things, and even the people by his side were annoyed, but he actually didn't panic. Feng Shihui thought about it and said, I have carefully investigated the details of his actions. He really does not panic. I even paid special attention to which restaurant he went to eat at noon. After he left, I went to the restaurant and asked the waiter about his appetite. It was no different from before. Yang Fan's brows furrowed slightly. He muttered, Does he not know that he does not need me to overturn the case? As long as he is unable to do anything to me, it will be enough to cause him to lose a great deal of prestige in the Ministry of Justice? What else does he rely on? Yang Fan stood up and paced slowly for a while. Suddenly, he stopped and said in a low voice, There is only one chance. We must be careful. Go back and investigate, especially the actions of his follower Luo Ling. There are some things that he cannot show himself for, so it will most likely fall on this Luo Ling. I want to know what he is relying on. Chapter 4:24. Yang Fan watched Feng Shihui's figure disappear behind the yellow walls of the temple. He slowly turned his head and looked up at the Chiyun Tower. It was as tall as a mountain, also known as Chiyun. The 13-story tower was completely made of wood. It stood tall and straight, elegant and beautiful. There was only a single arched door on the south side of the tower, allowing one to look into the distance. At this moment, Master Senshan and Monk Yizhua stood with Xiao Man at the top of the tower that seemed to reach the clouds. They gazed into the distance and pointed around. Yang Fan did not go up. He stood with his hands behind his back and slowly paced around the bottom of the tower, going through the matters of the Ministry of Justice in detail again. As soon as he sorted through his thoughts, Xiao Man emerged from the tower under the accompaniment of Master Senshan and the Yizhua monk. She smiled at him. Lang Jun, you can see all of Luoyang from here. It's really interesting. Why don't you go up and take a look? Yang Fan smiled. This isn't the first time Master Shui and I have ascended Qin Tower. Oh, after wandering around for so long, my wife should be rather tired. I'll ask senior brother Yizhua to accompany you back to the guest room first. Master Senshan and I will take a stroll over there. Oh, Xiao Man could probably tell that something was up to Yang Fan. Her clever eyes flashed, and she pursed her lips into a smile before leaving with Monk Yizhua. The master, Senshan, counted his prayer beads and stood there with a smile the entire time. Only when Xiao Man had left did he bow towards Yang Fan and ask with a smile, Doctor, is there something you want to ask me? Yang Fan said yes. I'd like to ask you, Master, if someone has become a monk in Luoyang, and I don't know which temple she's in, is there any way to find her easily? The Master Senshan was taken aback. He saw how strange his question was, so he guessed there must be something off about it. However, it was inconvenient for him to ask about it, so he answered, May I ask if the person you're talking about is a man or a woman, and if they've become a monk or a Taoist? Yang Fan smiled bitterly. About that, she's a woman. As for whether she's a monk or a Taoist, I really don't know. I only know that she became a monk in Luoyang. Oh! When Master Sanshan heard it was a woman, he seemed to understand something, even though he did not actually understand it. He stroked his snow-like white beard and said, It is naturally as difficult as ascending to the heavens for an ordinary person to find such a monk. However, with your status, Yang Langjong, as long as you know her name, it is not difficult to find her. Yang Fan's spirits rose, and he hurriedly said, Please advise me, Master. Master Sanshan said, In the past, the affairs of monks and Taoists have always been managed by the Chamberlain of Dependency's lofty mystery bureau. Ever since the Empress ascended to the throne, The management of the monks and nuns was under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Rites. The authority to manage the Taoists belonged to the imperial clan temple. As long as Yang Longzhong checks with these two yamens, do you think he won't be able to find her whereabouts? Yang Fan was overjoyed. He asked, "There must be records of their identities in these two yamens." Master Senshan said, "Of course. Anyone who becomes a monk must first study diligently under a master before being recommended by the master and approved by the court. When monks and Taoists are ordained in the two capitals of Chang and Anluoyang, an imperial censor is required to be present. Only then can they receive their credentials and become legal monks and Taoists. The court has a household register for monks and Taoists. They are like commoners, and they are registered once every 3 years for inspection. There can't be a mistake." Yang Fan felt like a huge burden had been lifted off his chest. He said happily, "That's good. I've asked around in private for a long time, but I still haven't received any information. Sure enough, I have to ask someone as understanding as you, Master. That makes things easier. All I need to do is—" When Yang Fan reached there, he suddenly blanked out. He slowly turned toward Senshan and asked in doubt, "Master, that can't be right. When I first became a monk, there were no imperial censors present. There was no one to verify my name or register me." Master Senshan's brows twitched a few times. He pressed his palms together and said, "Amitabha." Master Huai was the one who shaved Lang Zhong back then. Master Huai's shaving needs no approval, and which imperial censor would be bold enough to testify? Yang Fan came to a realization. He said, "That's good. No matter what, it's impossible for her to have been shaved by Master Shui. If that's the case, there'll definitely be records of it in the ancestral temple or the ancestral temple." That's not necessarily the case. Yang Fan's words reminded Master Senshan of something. He hurriedly added, "Is Lang Zhong sure that she's already a monk? If she's just a good faith who studies with her master and hasn't officially become a monk, then the authorities obviously won't have any records. Also, there's a class of people in the capital who call themselves monks the moment they put on Taoist robes. Actually, although these women wear Taoist robes, their daily necessities are the same as when they're at home. They even have many servant girls around them. Those people are also dressed like monks." Actually, Yang Fan could not help but frown when he heard that. "She definitely won't go to the secluded cultivation places that you speak of. However, if she hasn't officially become a monk yet—" Yang Fan slapped his forehead. "No matter what, I'll go to the ancestral temple and the ancestral temple to check first." "Thank you, Master. Yang Fachi, I'll be taking my leave." Take care, take care." Luo Faji clasped his hands at Yang Ji in a perfunctory manner. The person who had come was only a regular bailiff from the Ministry of Justice. If it were not for the fact that he served Minister Qindong of the Ministry of Justice, Yang Ji could not be bothered with him at all. Feng Shihui was in another recording room, currently chatting with someone he was familiar with. The window was open, so he happened to be able to see what was going on in the courtyard. As soon as he saw Luo Ling leave, he immediately bid farewell to his good friend and left the recording room, tailing Yang Ji. As soon as Yang Fachi returned to his recording room, Feng Shihui tailed him in. Feng Shihui might not be proud of his position in the Ministry of Justice now, but he had enjoyed some glory in the past. He knew Yang Ji as well. Although they were not extremely close friends, their relationship was not exactly cold. Feng Shihui smiled and clasped his hands at Yang Fachi, saying, "Yang Fachi, long time no see." Feng Shihui stayed in Yang Fachi's recording room for about an hour before leaving with a smile on his face. Yang Ji sent him to the courtyard. Looking at Feng Shihui's receding figure, he shook his head in bewilderment. He muttered to himself, "What's going on? Even if Minister Pan of the Ministry of Appointments asked for help, he should have asked the prison-breaking officer of this temple. Why did he go to the Ministry of Justice instead of what's close at hand?" So many people from the Ministry of Justice came one after another, but none of them had any weight. Yang Ji could not understand, no matter how much he thought about it. He shook his head and returned to his room. Feng Shihui left the Supreme Court. Without even returning to the Ministry of Justice, he rode straight to the White Horse Temple. Yang Fan lived in the White Horse Temple in the name of recuperating his body and observing whether or not he was infected with any diseases. These days he was really very idle. Every day, if he wasn't chatting with his fellow disciples, undressing and playing chess, he would accompany his wife to stroll around. He was really free and unfettered. Ever since the two of them got married, there had been many disturbances. This was the first time the two of them had put aside all the mundane affairs of the world. They were together day and night, and they were intimate. It was like mixing oil with honey. At this time, the husband and wife were fishing by the Luo River beside the White Horse Temple. This area belonged to the White Horse Temple. Since the White Horse Temple had the evil monk Xue Huai, no one dared to come here to check if anyone was fishing. Other than the people of the White Horse Temple, no one dared to fish here. Therefore, this area was very quiet with only the husband and wife. A real monk would not kill. As for those fake monks, if they wanted to eat fish, they could go to the store to eat. Who would understand the joy of fishing? Therefore, the Luo River became a small world for the husband and wife. The sunlight had lost its power of summer. It was very warm and comfortable when it shone on their bodies. The surface of the water was sparkling, and the two bobbers were gently blown by the wind, drifting close to each other, yet far from each other. The fishing rod was stuck in the ground, and the beautiful woman was in his arms. Yang Fan leaned against a warm big rock. He held his wife's soft and delicate body in his arms. He smelled the fragrance of her hair. His head rested on the big rock, and his eyes were slightly closed. The two of them did not speak. They just quietly enjoyed this warm time. Suddenly, a voice came from afar. Langzhong, Yang Langzhong. Yang Fan listened attentively and suddenly sat up straight. Xiao Man, who was drowsy in his arms, sat up. She opened her eyes and said, "It seems to be calling for Langjun." Yang Fan said, "Yes, I'll go take a look." There was a fish basket submerged in the water next to him. There were a few fat fish inside. The rope of the fish basket was tied to the stool under Yang Fan's buttocks. When he got up, the stool was relatively light, and the fish basket almost fell into the water, allowing the fish to escape. Xiao Man quickly grabbed it and sat on the stool. She snorted and said, "You want to run? It's not that easy. This one is steamed, and this one is fried." Yang Fan listened to Xiao Man's childish words and smiled as he walked over to Feng Shihui. Lang Zhong really has a divine plan. As soon as Feng Shihui walked to Yang Fan's side, he did not forget his specialty and immediately sent a flattering message. Yang Fan said, "What, did you gain something?" Feng Shihui said, "I already know what Qingdong is relying on." Yang Fan led him into the green forest. Looking at the half-exposed spire of Qiyun Tower in the forest, he said in a deep voice, "Let's hear it. Let's see what other trump cards our Dr. Qin has not used. Pan Junyi is dead. Pan Junyi." For a moment Yang Fan did not know who this person Feng Shihui suddenly mentioned was. He was startled for a moment before he remembered that this person was the main culprit behind Madame Cheng's innocent death, the son of Panduan, the Ministry of Appointments vice-chairman. Yang Fan was shocked. "Pan Junyi? How did he die?" Feng Shihui said, "Didn't Changlin owe him a large gambling debt? He wanted to use this gambling debt to force Changlin to give up his wife, but who knew that Changlin's wife, Madame Cheng, was beaten to death by her mother-in-law. Since the person was already gone, he wanted to ask for money, so he personally went to your house to ask for the debt." Yang Fan said angrily, "Madame Cheng was killed by him, and he still dares to come to ask for it?" Feng Shihui sighed. This is what a so-called evil person is like. Although this person's behavior is abominable, he does things in a watertight manner. What can we do to him? Yang Fan snorted and said, "Continue." Feng Shihui said that Chong Lin was schemed against by him and ended up owing a huge debt. "I beat a beautiful woman to death, and I'm now locked up in jail awaiting my sentence. Yet this Panjini actually came knocking on my door to demand payment. Even a rabbit will bite when it's anxious. Although this Chong Lin is useless, he has gone crazy and started fighting with Panjini." Chong Lin's son, Chong Jigua, was observing mourning for his mother in front of the memorial tablet. When he saw his father fighting with Panjini, his face turned red and he could not struggle, so he picked up his mother's memorial tablet and smashed it on the back of Panjini's head. In the end, Panjini died. Yes. Chapter 4:25. Yang Fan furrowed his brows. Leaves were already falling from the forest. The trees here were mainly elm and poplar trees. The leaves on the branches were dark green, and as the wind blew, some of the yellowed leaves fell off the branches and rolled on the ground, quietly gathering into a pile. When the two of them stepped on it, there was no clear sound of breaking leaves, only a rustling sound, like a silkworm swallowing mulberry leaves. When the two of them circled the forest for the second time, Feng Shihui had already explained everything. After Panjini's death, the case was reported to the Luoyang government. This was because, other than major cases of rebellion, all other cases could not be reported to the higher authorities and had to go through this procedure. After the Luoyang government received the complaint, they used the excuse that Panjini's father was a member of the Ministry of Justice's Board of Examiners and that he himself was a scholar with scholarly honors. Without a trial, they directly transferred the case to the Supreme Court. In the division of responsibilities of the three departments of law, the Supreme Court was responsible for the trials of cases involving officials in the capital, except for cases specially ordered by the emperor. For example, Yang Fan was an official in the capital. He was involved in a rebellion and should have been tried by the Supreme Court. However, the emperor had designated it to be tried by the Office of Imperial Messengers, so the Supreme Court did not have to interfere. When the Supreme Court received the case, they did not pay much attention. This case was clearly a case of injury and death, and the victim was a descendant of an official while the other was a normal commoner. What was so difficult about this case? The facts were clear, and the verdict was well-founded. The Supreme Court quickly made a verdict. The murderer will die, and Chang Ziyuan will pay with his life. When the verdict was made, the Supreme Court realized that they had been tricked by the Luoyang government. They had poked a hornet's nest. There was only one reason why the Luoyang government had transferred the case to the Supreme Court without a trial, to avoid trouble. As it turned out, the case of the Chang family's old woman beating her daughter-in-law to death had already spread like wildfire. A beautiful woman who had died an innocent and tragic death would always arouse sympathy. In this case, the mother-in-law was imprisoned, the son lost his wife, the grandson lost his mother, and the innocent woman died tragically. The cause of all this was Panjini, who was still at large. Whether it was those who spoke for the mother-in-law or those who sympathized with the daughter-in-law, everyone hated this person. However, in this murder case, although his role was not honorable, he did not need to bear any legal responsibility. It had not even been 7 days since Madame Cheng's body was laid to rest in her house, yet he had come to her door to force her to pay her debt. He had even fought with Chang Lin in front of the memorial tablet of the deceased. Chang Ziyuan, the son of the Chang family, had attacked him out of anger and used his mother's memorial tablet to smash him to death. In the eyes of the common people, this was retribution. Chang Ziyuan's mother was killed by Panjini, and now the government wants to kill her son. 3 generations of the Chang family are all in prison because of this case. Is there still justice in this world? The people of the Tang dynasty still had a little bit of fierce spirit in their bones. In addition, Wu Zetian often mobilized the masses to fight against the bureaucrats over the years, so the people really did not have much respect for the officials. As a result, the common people first gathered together, indescribably angry. When the anger was at its peak, there was one person who took the lead. Everyone made a rallying cry and organized themselves to rush to the imperial envoy platform in a grandiose manner, to cry out for justice on behalf of the Chang family's brat. What was the monster trainer stationed for? One of their important duties was to impeach the officials. When the officials from the Ministry of Works wrote their work reports, they wrote about how many roads they had built, how many bridges they had laid, and how many major projects they had presided over. When the officials from the Ministry of Rights wrote their work reports, they wrote about how many examinations they had taken this year, how many schools they had opened, how many people they had educated. As for the imperial envoy, they wrote about how many officials they had sued. This was their main political achievement. Seeing that this year's examination of merit was approaching, the imperial envoy station immediately followed the will of the people and impeached the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court insisted that they had judged the case according to the evidence, and that it was fair, just, and open. The two sides were in a deadlock. Luo Ling had gone to the Supreme Court to inquire about this case. It was obvious that Chen Dong wanted to use this case to do something. Yang Fan pondered and said, "The Supreme Court is responsible for the cases of the officials in the capital. Pan Jinyi is not an official, but the son of an official in the capital. Although his scholar status is a scholarly title, he is not considered an official. The Supreme Court does not need to try this case, but they have neglected it. Since they have already accepted the case and pronounced the verdict, they naturally cannot withdraw the case and return it to Luoyang for trial." Feng Shihui said yes. The reason the Luoyang government transferred the case to the Supreme Court without even trying it is probably because the Chang family's misfortune has aroused great public anger. They have already heard about it. After all, the Luoyang government has direct jurisdiction over the people of Luoyang. It is impossible for them not to have noticed it. Yang Fan nodded and said, "Yes." Which imperial envoy from the imperial envoy station brought up the impeachment? Su Yugong? In Yang Fan's impression, the imperial envoy station seemed to have only one good official left. The one who followed the will of the people to impeach the Supreme Court was most likely Su Yugong. Feng Shihui said, "It is not Su Yugong. It is Wan Guojun." Yang Fan suddenly stood still and looked at Feng Shihui in surprise. Feng Shihui nodded his head and said, "Yes, it is Wan Guojun." Yang Fan said suspiciously, "Wan Guojun? He is Lai Junchen's confidant. He has always been hiding behind the scenes and advising Lai Junchen like a military advisor. After Lai Junchen was demoted to Tangzhou to join the army, he was promoted to Deputy Minister of the Imperial Censor. He has been flying low and retracting his wings, and the entire Imperial Envoy Station has become quiet. This time, the victim is an official from the Ministry of Appointments, and the Supreme Court is the one handling the case. He has been making things difficult for these two yamens at the same time. If we say he is really pleading for the people, I am afraid we are giving him too much credit. What does he mean by this?" Feng Shihui frowned and said, "Flying low and retracting his wings might not really be willing to stay silent. Perhaps he is about to attack." Yang Fan thought for a moment and slowly nodded. "Yes, I think he is also unwilling to let the power of the Imperial Envoy Station fall to someone else. The reason he is willing to interfere in this matter is probably because he wants to coerce the will of the people, rebuild his image, and restore the prestige of the Imperial Envoy Station. Perhaps this is also a test of the Emperor's attitude towards the Imperial Envoy Station. That is why he chose this not too big of a case as a stepping stone." Yang Fan asked, "What does the Imperial Envoy Station suggest?" Feng Shihui said, "The Imperial Envoy Station thinks that Pan Jinyi has lost his morals and made the first mistake. At that time, he was fighting with Chang Lin. Chang Ziyuan, in order to save his father, hurriedly intervened. This is a show of filial piety. It was not his intention to kill by mistake. Moreover, he is young, so his punishment can be reduced by one class and sentenced to exile." Yang Fan looked at Feng Shihui and said, "Then, in your opinion, what does Qin Dong want to do?" Feng Shihui's face had a hint of bitterness. Right now, the Imperial Envoy Station and the Supreme Court are at loggerheads. The Ministry of Justice, the Supreme Court, and the Imperial Envoy Station are the three law departments of the Imperial Court. Since the Imperial Envoy Station and the Supreme Court are at loggerheads, then this case will have to be handed over to the Ministry of Justice for review. Yang Fan touched his nose and asked curiously, "So what? Should I be the judge of this case?" Feng Shihui imitated him and pinched his nose and said, "The case of Chang Lin's mother beating her daughter-in-law to death was snatched by you, Langzhong. This related case should naturally be judged by you. These two cases are intricately linked." Feng Shihui's voice contained a hint of bitterness. He was probably complaining that Yang Fan did not use the case that had been decided in advance to challenge him. Instead, he rashly chose this case that did not seem complicated at the time and got himself involved. Yang Fan smiled and said, "Don't make such an expression. It is not the end of the line yet." The two of them continued to walk forward. Yang Fan counted his fingers and said, "In that case, I think I understand a little. In the name of filial piety, Chen Dong reduced the punishment of the old woman from the Chang family. But I insist that he should be sentenced to death according to the law. Now that the Supreme Court wants to hand over this case, if I follow the Supreme Court's judgment and sentence the Chang family's son to death," Feng Shihui said, "then Langzhong will not be able to escape the name of a cruel official. Not only will he lose the support of the people, but the Imperial Envoy Station will also have an excuse to attack you. As for cruel officials, everyone used to look at them with a respectful distance. Ever since a handsome official was demoted, it has become a little like everyone wants to beat him up. Langzhong, you have just taken up a post in the Ministry of Justice, and you are sitting in the position that Zhou Xing used to sit in. If Langzhong shows even the slightest inclination, the officials in the court will definitely stifle a possible new cruel official in the bud." Yang Fan said, What if I follow the Imperial Envoy Station's decision and reduce the punishment of the Chang family's son by 1? Feng Shihui said, "Then the Supreme Court will make a big fuss about this, saying that you sentenced the old woman from the Chang family to death and sentenced the Chang family's son to life is differential treatment, trying to buy people's hearts. It is still hard to say now, but what can be predicted is that Sir will definitely offend the Supreme Court, the Ministry of Appointments, and also Wei Wang." Yang Fan's eyebrows slightly raised and asked, "What does this case have to do with Wei Wang?" Feng Shihui said, "The Ministry of Appointments vice-chancellor is now Wei Wang's disciple." Yang Fan was stunned for a moment, then laughed involuntarily. Without drawing a knife, he can cut off the enemy's head. Dr. Chen is really good at scheming. Yang Fan was determined to make things difficult for Qin Dong, so he had to start with Chen Dong's case. No matter how many tricks he did in the dark, they were all in the dark. In the end, he had to use these things that were laid out in the open, and defeat the other party fair and square. Only then could he ensure his position. As for which case he chose to make things difficult for, it was not important. Any case was just a weapon used in the battle between Qin Dong and Yang Fan. Therefore, when Yang Fan heard that the wife of the Cheng family whom he once knew had died unjustly, he was stirred up by righteous indignation and changed his opinion on his own accord, choosing this case as a breakthrough point. But man proposes, God disposes. At that time, no one would have thought that this case would have a follow-up development. Not only did it become more complicated, but it also involved the Imperial Envoy Station and the Supreme Court and even the Ministry of Appointments and Wei Wang. This case actually involved all three law departments, and all of them were involved. Wei Wang, Wu Changxi, Yang Fan suddenly remembered Er's earnest advice to him. At this moment, Lang Jun, you can touch anyone but the Wu family. You must never touch them. The emperor's mind has been made up. I'm afraid the crown prince will come from the Wu family. If it's not Wu Qingxi, then it's Wu Sanxi. But It's still hard to say who the crown prince will fall on. Langjun is still young, and the future is long. You can't easily decide who your family belongs to. The Ministry of Justice is the emperor's eyes and ears. Langjun only needs to do his best to be the eyes and ears. When Yang Fan thought of this, he couldn't help but sigh softly. He raised his head to look at the treetops above his head. The treetops swayed under the light breeze. The sunlight followed the swaying of the treetops. Sometimes it shone on his shoulder, and sometimes it became a shadow. The tree wants to be quiet, but the wind does not stop. What can I do? Chapter 4:26. No matter what you do now, you'll attract the attack of the other party. As long as you don't win beautifully, Director Chen will be defeated without a fight. This was what Feng Shihui said before he left. Feng Shihui was a little discouraged. He was not optimistic about Yang Fan's situation, but he still rushed over and explained everything to Yang Fan. He had done his best. The next day, Yang Fan went up to Crouching Bull Mountain. Not long after Feng Shihui left, Xue Huai went to look for him and revealed some things to Yang Fan in the most subtle way that this boorish man who liked to be straightforward could. Wu Sanxi sent someone over because Pan Ziwen was Wu Qingxi's man. He wanted Yang Fan to take this opportunity to overturn the Supreme Court's verdict. After this case was decided, he could use the excuse of not teaching his son well to attack Pan Ziwen. Although Pan Ziwen's position was not high, he had a lot of power. If he could win this position, it would be much easier for Wu Sanxi to rope in the officials. Soon after, Wu Qingxi also sent someone over. Wu Qingxi naturally wanted Yang Fan to uphold the Supreme Court's verdict in order to protect his right-hand man, Pan Ziwen. Wu Qingxi's relationship with Yang Fan was not as good as Wu Sanxi's, so he had used both the carrot and the stick to persuade Yang Fan. In any case, if Yang Fan complied with Wu Qingxi's wishes, he would definitely take care of Yang Fan in the official circles in the future. Xue Huai was not stupid. He was unreasonable in front of people because of his special identity. He also understood that his disciple did not have a golden shield to protect himself, so he pretended to be stupid and sent both sides away. He did not let them meet Yang Fan directly. This way, Yang Fan would not be in a hurry to make a decision and could weigh the pros and cons. After Yang Fan heard the news from Xue Huai, he was afraid that Wu Sanxi and Wu Qingxi would force him again. If they came personally, Xue Huai would not be able to stop them, so he escaped to Crouching Bull Mountain. If he wanted to return, he would naturally have to wait until everything was decided. Not long after Yang Fan left, Wu Qingxi and Wu Sanxi personally came to the White Horse Temple. Xue Huai sat in the middle like a great Buddha, while Wu Qingxi and Wu Sanxi sat on his left and right. Their brows were furrowed, and they looked like a pair of glaring Vajras. Xue Huai was laughing so loudly that his laughter shook the roof tiles. "Your Highnesses, you came at the right time. I'm bored of being alone, ha 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 ha. Hong Lu, tell the kitchen to prepare some dishes and wine. I want to drink with the two princes, and I won't go home until I'm drunk. Ha ha." "What?" The prince asked where Yang Fan was. Yang Fan had gone to Crouching Bull Mountain to hunt. "Sick? Hey, there's no need to burn fake incense in front of a true Buddha. You and I both know what the so-called plague is. Of course, he is alive and kicking. Ha ha. What? Io, there's nowhere to look for him. Crouching Bull Mountain is so big, and I'm not a living deity. How would I know which mountain he went to hunt on? Ha ha. What? Oh, of course. He's acting like this just to show that Qingai some respect. In another 2 days, he'll definitely return to work in the yamen. Ha ha ha." Xue Huai, who used to play with sticks and sell fake medicine, was actually very good at playing Tai Chi. He held Wu Qingxi and Wu Sanxi firmly there. He did not say a word about his business, and even if they wanted to leave, there was no way. After a while, the food and wine were served, and Xue Huai fed them with fake medicine. The two princes were supported by someone, and when they walked out of the White Horse Temple dizzily, Shui Huai's heroic ha 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 was still echoing in their minds. There were no cows on Crouching Bull Mountain, but there were monkeys. At this moment, Yang Fan and Xiao Man were sitting side by side on a towering ancient tree. The trunk they were sitting on had already been peeled off, and only the trunk was as smooth as bone. The two of them sat on top of it and looked at the group of monkeys in the forest in front of them. There were about 100 monkeys in this group. The Monkey King was attacked by some kind of fierce beast and died from serious injuries. The monkeys lost their leader and immediately fell into chaos. The strong male monkeys started to have ideas. Some of them gathered in twos and threes and tried to test each other. The tall and fat ones, who were confident in their strength, stood on the branches and looked around, trying to recruit subordinates. Some of the male monkeys comforted their companions from time to time, and some urged the monkeys that had already pledged loyalty to them to provoke other monkeys that had formed small groups to test each other's strength. Because this was not a challenge to the Monkey King, but the Monkey King had suddenly died, and the monkeys were fighting for the position. Therefore, the situation became especially complicated. After a period of preparation, the battle of the monkeys finally began. It was unknown which monkey took the lead to attack its opponent, but the monkeys rushed forward as if they had heard an order. The female monkeys screamed and jumped on the branches, waiting for the appearance of the king. On the grass in the forest, the male monkeys began to fight. Some of them had their eyes injured, some had their fingers bitten, and some had their hair scratched off. Yang Fan watched quietly. A strong yellow-haired monkey was very powerful, so its opponents, a male monkey with long eyebrows and a monkey with black and yellow hair, formed an alliance and attacked it at the same time. After a few battles, the yellow-haired monkey was covered with cuts and bruises. Finally, it whined and admitted defeat. The curly-browed monkey was proud of himself. He stood up like a human and waved his arm at the female monkey on the branch. The black and yellow monkey, which was its ally just now, suddenly jumped up and pounced on him. After another fierce battle, the black and yellow monkey, which had one of its legs bitten off, escaped. The curly-browed monkey climbed up a bluestone cliff that was more than 3 people tall. With a sharp cry, its tail stood up high like a flagpole. The male monkeys gathered under the rock and looked up at it. The female monkeys jumped up the cliff one after another, squeezing and rubbing at him, winking at him. Xiao Meng found it interesting and couldn't help but laugh. These monkeys are so interesting. Yang Fan also laughed. He put his arm around her waist and said, "Well, a group of monkeys is actually quite scheming." Xiao Meng laughed and said, "Monkeys understand human nature, but their so-called scheming, in our eyes, is really childish and ridiculous." Yang Fan scratched her nose and said, "After all, they are a group of monkeys. They think that their scheming is brilliant, but in our eyes, of course, it is childish and ridiculous. Otherwise, the most intelligent of all creatures is not human, but—" When Yang Fan said this, his heart suddenly trembled. Was he now a monkey who wanted to fight for the position of Monkey King? Chun Dong was the current Monkey King of this mountain of the Ministry of Justice. He wanted to replace the strong male monkey and become the new Monkey King. Regardless of the female monkeys that were scratching their heads and throwing themselves into his arms, or the other male monkeys that were itching to try yet didn't dare to make a move, all of them could only wait until the end of the Monkey King hegemony competition before they would bow their heads and pledge their loyalty to the victor. From this point, even the flatter monkey with the surname Fong was no exception. If he won, he would be the Monkey King of the Ministry of Justice. If he lost, he would push down everyone who was down. He couldn't even hide in a corner and pick up leftovers. What difference was there between this situation and this group of monkeys? However, no one could interfere with this group of monkeys fighting for the throne, but he was different. He still had a supreme emperor above him. This emperor sent him to the Ministry of Justice and specially instructed one, or to make it clear to him that he was to be the emperor's new eyes and ears. Would the emperor not ask about his actions in the Ministry of Justice? The scheming of this group of monkeys, in the eyes of him and Xiao Meng, only felt that it was childish and ridiculous. Between the two doctors of the Ministry of Justice, between the three departments of justice, between Prince Wei and Prince Liang, all kinds of scheming methods. Once seen in the eyes of the high and mighty emperor, what kind of opinion would she have? He used methods to manipulate Qindong. That was a kind of ability, and the high and mighty emperor would only feel admiration. He would only feel that he had a good eye for talent and had not misjudged him. However, if two great power groups interfered and the three law divisions fought openly and covertly, if he had to choose whose power was greater and who could obtain more benefits from them, would the emperor still maintain this kind of aloof attitude? What the emperor wanted to nurture was a trusted aide, not a capable general for her faction. In the forest, the newly born Monkey King was proudly receiving the worship of the other monkeys. The previous Monkey King's beloved concubine, the red-faced female monkey, had already gently moved to its side and become its concubine. It was now the supreme existence of this group of monkeys. However, Yang Fan only needed a flick of his finger to take its life. After that, the monkeys would once again engage in a fierce battle, and a new Monkey King would be born until he was satisfied. Regardless of whether it was the decisive battle between him and Qindong, the struggle between the three departments of justice, or even the struggle between Prince Wei and Prince Liang, once there was a so-called victor, would he be like this complacent Monkey King before him? As long as that high and mighty existence was dissatisfied, he could erase everything at any time and force them to start anew? A chill suddenly swept past Yang Fan's heart. Xiao Man sensed that something was wrong with him. She grabbed his hand and asked with concern, "What's wrong, Lang Jun?" Yang Fan said, I know what I should do about the current situation." Xiao Man's delicate eyebrows jumped, and she gave him a lively, questioning look. Yang Fan pulled her into his embrace and gently stroked her beautiful hair. He leisurely swung his legs that were dangling from the branches and whispered into her ear, "What Ministry of Justice? What Ministry of Imperial Envoy? What Prince Liang, Prince Wei? Everything I do, as long as I uphold the word righteous, it will be enough." Yang Fan casually broke off a withered branch, and with a flick of his finger it flew out with a whoosh and struck the flagpole-like tail of the new Monkey King. That Monkey King wailed in pain and jumped off the cliff in fright. With a loud roar, he led the other monkeys into the dense forest. Yang Fan sighed softly and said, "If I can't uphold the word righteous, and choose to rely on one of the various powers that are trying to recruit me, even if I win this time, I will still be defeated, and I will be defeated forever. If I can uphold the word righteous, even if I lose this time, I will still have another chance. Moreover, I might not necessarily lose." He slowly raised his head and gazed at the sky. The sky was clear and blue, and a few pure white clouds were drifting across the distant sky. Yang Fan looked at the clouds and said unhurriedly, "Because there are people up there." Chapter 4:27. It was another morning. The bells and drums in the city had just struck for the 800th time. The yamen of the Ministry of Justice was the same as usual. The people walking in front were prisoners wearing shackles and shackles. Behind them were officials in black robes who dragged their wind and fire rods and swayed lazily in the long corridor. There were low-ranking officials who were walking hurriedly in front of the departments. When they saw a superior with a higher rank, they would stop and greet him respectfully and warmly. There seemed to be something different. There were more people in the yamen today. Perhaps it was because of one reason or another. Some people who did not have to report to the yamen early in the morning had arrived early. Or some people who liked to stay in the office after arriving at the yamen were also loitering in the courtyard, looking for someone to talk to. Could it be today was payday? There was a courtyard with gray eaves in the northwest corner of the yamen. That was the public kitchen of the Ministry of Justice. After the smoke had stopped for many days, the sky above that courtyard began to emit faint smoke again early in the morning. When the low-ranking officials and officials in the yamen saw each other, they would stop and greet each other. Their greetings were all the same. "The pestilence doctor is back." When they finished, they would smile tacitly and nod their heads. No one knew what they understood, but they would pass by each other. Some of the officials who were more or less in charge of some errands, even if they were minor officials of the lower 9th rank, inevitably had to put on some airs. When they saw low-ranking officials, they naturally didn't bat an eyelid. When they saw officials of the same rank, they just nodded and smiled, but that smile had an extra layer of inexplicable meaning than usual. It was only when they met their superior, a superior whom they were usually very close to, that they would hastily approach them, and with an expression even more anxious than that of the petty officials and officials, they hurriedly said, "Dr. Pestilence is back! What should we do?" Their superiors almost all had the same expression and the same words. They would keep a straight face and reprimand in a deep voice, "Watch your own mouths and do your own work. Don't ask around. When two bodhisattvas are fighting, when did you have the right to tell them what to do? This is just the beginning, do you understand?" Whether the low-ranking officials understood or not, they just nodded their heads blankly, as if they understood everything. No one knew what kind of Zen they were chanting, but the entire Ministry of Justice seemed to be shrouded in a mysterious and hazy atmosphere. The plague doctor was naturally Yang Fan. He used the plague stratagem to turn the entire Ministry of Justice upside down. Then he hid in the White Horse Temple and enjoyed his leisure time. From that day onwards, he was nicknamed Dr. Pestilence by the officials who had given him the nickname Chen Feng. It was still Assistant Minister Chui's office, and it was still one of the 5 great ministers of the Ministry of Justice. Gentle blade, Qin Dong, window-breaking axe, Pai Erding, difficult to write, Sun Yuxuan, sweet potato waiting, Yan Xiaojun and Yang Fan, who had just been given the elegant title of Plague Doctor, sat upright and still. Chui Bodhisattva, the wooden sculpture, slowly walked out from behind the screen. He looked at the 5 lamps and coughed softly. The 5 of them stood up together and paid their respects to Assistant Minister Chui. "Greetings, Assistant Minister." "Everyone, please sit." Chui Bodhisattva sat on the seat of honor and pressed his hands together. The 5 great ministers returned to their seats with a swoosh. Chui Bodhisattva coughed again and said, "A few days ago, many people in the Ministry of Justice fell ill with an acute illness. The symptoms were similar to the plague. To be cautious, the court temporarily isolated all the officials who contracted the illness. The affairs of the yamen were inevitably affected. Everyone knew what the plague was about a few days ago, but what could not be discussed on the table was not discussed. If it were someone in the military, they would have already used their bodies to speak. However, the people in the hall all looked calm, as if what Chui Yuanzong said was true. Chui Yuanzong continued, "Now that the Imperial Medical Bureau has investigated and confirmed that it was a false alarm, all the officials are here. We have to make the best use of the time to deal with the affairs that have been delayed these days. Otherwise, we will miss the time limit set by the court." Chui Yuanzong covered his mouth and coughed. He picked up a thick file from the table and gently caressed the hard leather cover. His eyelids also gently drooped as if he was caressing the smooth skin of his favorite concubine, Miss Hua-Ying. Old Chui touched it for a while, then slowly said, "Yesterday, a case was transferred from the Supreme Court. Because the Imperial Envoy Station had doubts, and the Supreme Court insisted on its own judgment, so, according to the rules, the Ministry of Justice will review the case." At this point, Chui Yuanzong gently raised his head and glanced at Yang Fan. He said with a faint smile, "This case is closely related to the case handled by Yang Langzhong. According to the rules, it should be reviewed by Yang Langzhong. I have discussed this with Dr. Sun yesterday. Dr. Chen also has the same opinion. Yang Langzhong." Yang Fan smiled and straightened his back. He said, "Seriously, since this is the rule and the assistant minister has already arranged it, I will comply." But the corner of his mouth curled up. He said mockingly, "If the scribe and Yamen officials suddenly get sick again, I'm afraid these two cases will be reviewed indefinitely." Hearing this, Qindong's expression became slightly uncomfortable, but he quickly put on a very calm expression. Seeing him agree, Cui Yuanzong secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He said repeatedly, "It won't happen, it won't happen. I promise that this kind of thing will never happen again." Pai Erding, Sun Yuxuan, and Yan Xiaojun all looked at him with a somewhat strange expression. The trick that Yang Fan played earlier was not like that of a new official. They did not believe that Yang Fan knew nothing about this case that had been transferred from the Supreme Court. Even so, Yang Fan was still willing to accept this hot potato. This matter was thought-provoking. Of the three doctors, only Yan Xiaojun looked at Yang Fan with a faint trace of sympathy. Old Yan was also a slanderous person. When he was still a small Yamen official, just because a melon farmer refused to give him a melon to eat for free, he could run to the Yamen and make up a lie about thieves hiding in the melon fields. In the end, the farmer's melon fields had no melons to harvest. Given his vengeful personality, he very much admired the way Yang Fan punished those small officials and Yamen officials who looked down on him. Therefore, Old Yan felt that Yang Fan was a hero and a hero. Yang Fan smiled again. He said, "This lowly official is in charge of the Ministry of Justice. I wonder if I have the authority to judge the officials of this ministry?" Cui Yuanzong did not know why he had suddenly brought up this topic. He couldn't help feeling surprised. After thinking for a while, he said, "Officials, but not officials." Yang Fan nodded. "Yes." Cui Yuanzong smiled. "Of course I have the authority to judge. However, whether it is scribes or Yamen officials, most of them are sons who inherit their father's position. This position is hereditary. Unless there is a big mistake, there is no such thing as dismissal." Yang Fan opened his mouth and smiled. He said lightly, "Assistant Minister's words are too serious. This lowly official does not want to dismiss anyone. It is just that during the last court session, I felt that the vice monitor named Yuan Han was quite easy to use. Now I want him to be the monitor." Cui Yuanzong was stunned. He coughed and said, "He is just an ordinary official. As for the matter of moving him, the doctor can decide. There is no need to tell me." Yang Fan bowed and said yes. Yan Xiaojun's gaze towards Yang Fan had an additional tinge of admiration. Don't beg that monitor to listen to Qindong's instigation to make him look bad. Then he would put down his airs as a doctor and settle a score with this lowly official. He is one of us. He is indeed a man of my generation. From now on, I will no longer be alone. A trace of contempt flashed quickly in Qindong's eyes. A dignified doctor of the current imperial court was also one of the top officials in the Ministry of Justice. Yet he was actually haggling over minor matters with a lowly official. This person's breadth of mind and vision was only SOSO. What great things could he do? In reality, both of them had guessed wrongly. Yang Fan was not the type to argue or seek revenge for the smallest grievance. The reason he cared about this matter was that he had only been in the Ministry of Justice for a short time. To obtain the obedience of his subordinates, one was prestige and the other was ability. Both were indispensable. In terms of ability, as long as he could handle this thorny case of the three departments satisfactorily, he would be able to gain the recognition of all the officials in the Ministry of Justice, subordinates, the three departments of justice, and even the emperor. On the other hand, prestige was a gradual process. It was impossible for everyone to have the authority to kill people to establish prestige. The 6 ministries were not the army. This was a place where bureaucrats and civil officials gathered. It was impossible for him to use military law to kill people to establish prestige. Thus, this was a gradual process. When the words, "I am in charge here," were instilled into everyone's hearts, his prestige would naturally be established. Once this idea was instilled in everyone's hearts, his prestige would naturally also be established. What he was doing now was instilling this idea into all of his subordinates in the Ministry of Justice. He did not have the time to waste. From time to time, he would have to wrangle with his subordinates. If he did not do well, he would be tricked at a crucial moment by a small official such as a constable or a supervisor. He would be forced to learn from the window breaker, Dr. Pai, and climb out of the window to retrieve documents. After this incident, anyone who encouraged their subordinates to drag him down would have to think twice. Cui Yuanzong's expression became solemn. He said sanctimoniously, "All right, there is nothing else. I just want to tell everyone that the case Yang Langzhong is investigating involves the 3 departments of justice. Thus, when he needs the assistance of the departments, no one is to be negligent. In addition, Yang Langzhong has only just arrived and will inevitably be unfamiliar with matters. Dr. Chen has been in the Ministry of Justice for a long time. If Yang Langzhong has any matters to discuss with you, you must assist him." "Yes. We will solemnly obey the Assistant Minister's instructions. Many thanks for the Assistant Minister's protection." The 5 doctors rose together and bowed to Cui Yuanzong, respectfully sending the Bodhisattva back to his seat. Cui Yuanzong then walked behind the screen. "Everyone, farewell." Pai Erding cupped his hands to everyone and floated out. Sun Yuxuan hesitated for a moment, then cupped his hands to Yang Fan. The case that the Supreme Court of Justice handed over may not be complicated, but it involves all the departments of the 3 departments of justice. This makes it very complicated. Yang Langzhong, be careful. Sun Yuxuan still gave him a word of advice because of the endless free drinks every day. Yan Xiaojun also smiled. This kind of case is not easy to judge. It is a pool of muddy water to begin with. How can we clear it? If we can make the 3 departments of justice leave some face, then it will be perfect. Haha, this is just a crude opinion. Please consider it. Farewell. He rather admired Yang Fan's personality. So old, Yan also gave him a word of advice. When Chen Dong heard this, his face darkened slightly. Yang Fan's face was not very pale, but compared to him, he had a jade-like complexion and vermilion lips, a handsome young man. The others left, but Chen Dong could not. This was because he and Yang Fan were officials in the same department. Thus, one with a black face and one with a white face returned to the Ministry of Justice together. Chapter 428. Might. In the hall of the Ministry of Justice, the shouting of Might of the Court this time was neat, loud, and dignified. The sound waves converged into a wave of air, as if a whirlwind had risen from the ground. The window lattice and people's hearts shivered in this shout of Might of the Court. The design of the hall originally had the effect of strengthening the might of the court. If the prisoners heard this frightening shout, they would lose some of their courage. The mirror of eminence hung high, and the seat of the presiding judge was still empty. The yamen guards lined up on both sides, with their wind and fire rods on the ground. They looked serious and strict. There was a short table on both sides of the presiding judge's desk. The supervisor and the secretary stood behind the short table, waiting for the presiding judge. The chief and deputy chief stood at the forefront of the yamen guards, with their chests out and their heads raised. Their bearing, when it came to bearing, these 2 chiefs were really not imposing enough. Although they tried their best to straighten their bodies, they still looked like wilted ears of grain. Standing in front of the line on the right was Deputy Chief Yuan Han. Deputy Chief Yuan's expression was very unnatural. He had never been a chief before, but now that he had done it, he had ambition in his heart. As soon as Chief Mo came back, he, the acting chief, was immediately beaten back to his original position. How could he feel comfortable? Standing in front of the yamen guards on the left was Mo Chiu, the chief who had suddenly contracted an emergency last time. At this moment, Mo Ban looked like he was suffering from an epidemic. His head and face were swollen, and in the middle of the red lumps there were a few deep and shallow streaks, like the long tails of comets sweeping across the sky. The red envelope was bitten by autumn mosquitoes when he was quarantined in the wilderness. The autumn mosquitoes in the wilderness were fierce. Bitten by a big bump, it was itchy, painful, and swollen. It would not go away for half a month. It would be uncomfortable if you didn't scratch it, and it would be even more uncomfortable if you scratched it. As for the tails of comets on his face, according to him, it was caused by the itching and scratching of his skin. However, almost everyone had been bitten by mosquitoes, and he had never seen anyone who scratched from the temples to the cheeks after being bitten by a mosquito. Scratching his face until it was blooming could relieve the itch. It was given to him by the class monitor's wife, who had accompanied him to be locked up in the wild and fed mosquitoes for many days, in a fit of rage. Yang Fan walked out from behind the screen and looked at the solemn court. He frowned and said to Feng Shihui, "Why is there such a grand display?" Feng Shihui said in a daze, "Sir, it has always been like this in court." "Oh, yes, it's my fault." Yang Fan suddenly understood and said with a smile, "I didn't make it clear. In these two cases, the murderer and the witness are all from the same family. 3 generations of grandfather and grandson facing each other in court is not a good thing. Let this official interrogate the case in the second hall. Bring them to the second hall. Also, bring them up one by one. Don't let them meet each other." Feng Shihui thought, "What's so important about this case? Other than Dr. Chin, no one cares if the old woman dies or not. The case transferred over by the Supreme Court is more important. Instead of focusing on that case, Yang Longjong wants to investigate the death of Lady Cheng as well. How can he not distinguish the importance of this case?" Feng Shihui thought this, but he didn't dare to say anything. He hurriedly agreed and did as he was told. Just as Yang Fan was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly saw Emo Chiu with a big bump on his face. He couldn't help but be startled and asked, "Who are you? Since you're the class monitor, why have I never seen you before?" At this moment, Emo Chiu didn't have the slightest bit of arrogance left. Although he hated Yang Fan in his heart, he didn't dare to show it on his face. He just replied politely, "Doctor, this lowly one is this department's monitor, Emo Chiu." Yang Fan replied with an "oh" and said indifferently, "So it's you. From now on, this department's monitor is Yuan Han. As for you, you'll be his assistant and be the deputy monitor." Yuan Han was surprised and happy when he heard this, but Emo Chiu was both shocked and angry. In a moment of anger, he blurted out, "May I ask, Doctor, what mistake did this lowly one make to be removed from the monitor position?" Yang Fan glanced at him and said, "No mistake." "Then what's the reason?" "No reason." Yuan Han was so angry that he laughed and said angrily, "Ha! Since there's no mistake and no reason, how can this lowly one be convinced by doctor's judgment?" Yang Fan also laughed and said indifferently, "Why do I need you to be convinced? You just need to obey." Emo Chiu clenched his fists and asked in a loud voice, "Then what's the reason?" Yang Fan curled his lips disdainfully and turned to walk behind the screen. His footsteps were neither fast nor slow, but his voice didn't stop because of his footsteps. His words were clearly sent into Emo Chiu's ears, as well as the ears of everyone in the courtroom. "There's no reason for anything, only because this is the decision of I, the head of the Ministry of Justice, Yang Longjong." The first to be brought into the second hall by Feng Shihui was Chang Ziyuan, the half-grown child that Yang Fan had met at the Tianjin Bridge. He was the Lady Cheng's side. It was no wonder that he had to be the judge of this case. In the case of the old woman beating her daughter-in-law to death, Chang Ziyuan and his father Chang Lin were the witnesses. In the case of the Chang Ziyuan beating Pan Jinyi to death, his father was the witness, and he was the murderer. How were these two cases going to be separated? The second hall was much more relaxed than the main hall. There were no signs that said silence or out of sight, and there were no bailiffs shouting Hall's might. There were also no 2 rows of wind and fire rods, which made people tremble with fear when they saw them. Yang Fan sat behind the table. When he saw the little prisoner in chains being brought in, he smiled and said, "Today I will be investigating the case of your mother's innocent death. Chang Ziyuan, you witnessed everything that happened at the time. Now come to me one by one. Not a word of falsehood is allowed." When the yamen bell rang, Yang Fan was the same as before, scrambling to leave the yamen with the petty officials and bailiffs. Dr. Chen was as slow as ever, as if he had an endless amount of documents to deal with. However, his attention today was clearly not on the files. From time to time, he would raise his head and glance at the door as if he was waiting for something. "He's coming, he's coming." Luo Ling burst through the door and said excitedly. Before he could finish his sentence, the scribe who took down Yang Fan's notes today hurriedly walked in. Chun Dong hurried forward and said warmly, "Mingda, it's been hard on you." The clerk's surname was Qin, and his name was Qin Mingda. Qin Mingda was flattered and said, "I'm willing to work for Dr. Qin. It's not hard at all." Qin Dong chuckled and said, "Come, come, come, sit, sit, sit." He pushed Qin Mingda into a chair, then lifted the hem of his robe and sat down as well. He said calmly, "Tell me, what has he been busy with this day?" Qin Mingda frowned slightly and muttered to himself for a moment. Then he said after some deliberation, "He's been asking questions for the entire day. He's been asking questions tirelessly over and over again, asking questions in a confusing manner." As Qin Mingda spoke, he lightly shook his head and said, "This lowly official feels that he has some ulterior motive, but I don't know what it is." Chen Dong's eyes flashed, and he asked, "Where's the statement?" Qin Mingda said, "It's already been kept by Yang Longzhong. This lowly official has been taking down the statement, and my hands are about to break from exhaustion. But I didn't have the time to make another copy." Qin Dong said, "Pick up the parts that you can remember and tell me in detail." Qin Mingda began to describe as he was told. Chen Dong paced slowly in the room, listening carefully to his narration. After listening for a long time, he suddenly stopped and said slowly, "I understand now. He's trying to lure me into a confession." Qin Mingda was stunned and said in surprise, "Lure me into a confession? How is that possible?" Qin Dong smiled and explained to him, "The lure I'm talking about is, of course, not the usual kind of lure that you think it is. I'm talking about—" It seemed like Qin Dong also couldn't think of how to explain it. He deliberated for a moment before saying word by word. It's possible that some scenes that really existed were overlooked by Chang Lin and Chang Ziyuan, so Yang Fan wanted to dig them out. Some of the statements might not be what Yang Fan wanted. He wanted to mix his own judgment and analysis in this kind of repeated questioning, so that the father and son would unknowingly recall and describe according to his inclination. Qin Mingda said in shock, "Isn't this luring them into lying?" No, it's not lying." Chun Dong smiled and said, "You have to know that you don't need to conceal the truth of the same matter. You just need to use different words to describe it, and when others hear it, they will have a completely different impression. This is the effect that Yang Fan wants." Qin Dong took a deep breath and said, "There are also some that the father and son had completely forgotten in their panic at that time. In that kind of situation, it was inevitable that they would overlook some things in their panic, and these things would become a blank in their minds. Yang Fan would help them fill in this part of their memory through repeated questioning and skillful luring." Chun Dong placed his hands behind his back and said in a low voice, because those missing memories are something that they're unable to recall. So when Yang Fan asks them repeatedly and incessantly, the scene that appears in their hearts will be something that they've seen with their own eyes and heard with their own ears. It's absolutely true. Qin Mingda said in a daze, "What is he trying to do by putting in so much effort?" Chen Dong shook his head and said, "From what you said just now, the things that he lured Chang Lin and his son to remember are all beneficial to reducing their punishment. It seems like this young man has the drive of a greenhorn and wants to be a good official that is praised by the people. But—" Qin Dong frowned and said with some doubt, "If he does this, he will offend a lot of people. What is he trying to do?" Could it be that he wants to be an honest and upright official, gain a good reputation like Yang Qingtian, and then hang up his crown and leave? The Yang Qingtian that Qindong mentioned had already arrived home. He stood behind the screen wall and smiled like a big corrupt official who had received a mountain of gold. He instructed the doorkeeper, Mo Xuanfei, "After dinner, don't stroll around. You stay at the door and guard it well. From today onwards, there will definitely be guests coming to our house." Mo Xuanfei scratched the back of his head and asked curiously, "Ah Lang, do you know in advance that there will be guests coming to our house?" Yang Fan said with a smile, "Of course. Not only do I know that there will be guests coming, but I also know that guests will never come empty-handed. All right, keep a close eye on the door. If there are guests, report to me immediately." After saying that, Yang Fan put his hands behind his back and walked slowly into the courtyard.